Chapter 890. It's over? What's over? Lieutenant General Hu Lien looked into Helay's eyes and reprimanded coldly. Every moment, our comrades are dying on this planet. Did they wail that they were done for before they died? Are you trying to tell me that the lives of the bandits under your command are more precious than the lives of the soldiers of other units? Helay naturally did not dare to say such a thing, but his concern for his subordinates still tugged at his sharp brows, making him feel extremely pained. The NTR unit was a special organization among the Federation's most elite divisions. They were all made up of the most outstanding and brave officers and men who had seriously violated military orders. This kind of unit needed to play an extremely complicated role on the battlefield. Their combat strength was valiant, but they often had to undertake the most difficult and dangerous missions. In the dark culture of the military camp, they had always been considered not just a suicide squad, but a suicide squad. Helay was now the acting commander of the new 17th Division. 2 months ago, the NTR unit under his command had received a top-secret mission from the General Staff to secretly infiltrate the graphite mine in the southwest. They were in charge of eliminating the information team sent there by the Imperial Command. After that, the situation suddenly changed. The Southwest War Zone became a sea of fire, and the Battle of the Straits officially began. Under such a vast background, the NTR unit, which only had 70 people, instantly became an inconspicuous existence. It was to the point that other than the 17th Division, not many people noticed their disappearance. Helay was well aware of the danger of this secret mission. In his opinion, this kind of mission that was almost impossible to complete was purely a suicide mission. Now, there was no news of this unit, and they had fallen into the most desperate Southwest War Zone. There were no brother units around to respond to, so the situation was definitely extremely dangerous. Commander, we've already lost contact with the NTR unit's Camp 1. Camp 2, which is closest to our war zone, has also lost supplies. We should at least send a reconnaissance unit to provide supplies and ask about the situation over there, right? Thinking of the tragic scene that could happen on the front lines, thinking of Xiong Linquan and the other members of the first 7 teams who had been forcefully transferred into the NTR unit by the General Staff before the battle, Helay felt as if his body had fallen into a cold ice cellar. He clenched his fists and said angrily, I don't dare say that their lives are more precious than others, but although that unit only has 70 people, all of them are the most outstanding vanguards. 34 of them have the title of War Hero. Lieutenant General Hu Lien looked at the unruly colonel and said in a cold voice, We are all men who have risked our lives on the front lines. Who doesn't wear a few military medals in front of their chests when they pick a random unit? Colonel Helay, watch your identity and words. Even if you are the acting commander of the new 17th Division, you have no right to ask other troops to make unnecessary sacrifices for your people. Think about the 4 divisions in the Southwest War Zone that are about to be crippled. Just think about the Black Mountain Group that had fought for 48 hours to seal off the northern route of the Straits War Zone. Don't you understand what it means for the headquarters to have the new 17th Division stay in the rear? And you still have the face to raise conditions with me at this time? The general's expression was dark as he scolded. According to Commander Du's plan, the federal forces want to take down the 3 strongest mecha clans in one go. Do you know how much we have to pay? Every unit has its own mission. If you want to rescue that NTR unit, who will you send? Have Colonel Li Feng withdraw from the Straits? Or have a Northern Armor Division ignore that princess and go straight south? The new 17th Division had been unable to participate in this bloody battle that had been planned for a long time on planet Imohua. So they were in an extremely awkward situation. Helay knew very well why the upper echelons of the military wanted his unit to stay in the rear. That was because the new 17th Division carried the unparalleled glory of war godly Pifu, and the federal military did not want this unit to suffer too many losses in such a bloody and cruel battle. However, it was precisely this kind of consideration that made Helay and the entire new 17th Division feel an unprecedented humiliation. At this moment, when he heard the commander's merciless scolding, his weathered face instantly turned red, and he replied loudly, "We don't need the support of our brother's troops. We will go ourselves. The 17th Division is yours?" General Hu Yin suddenly raised his voice, pointing angrily at the other's nose and roaring, "That is the Federation's unit. If you don't want to teach me how to command, then get the hell out of here." Just like the strange gray-black snow above the forward operating base, the atmosphere in the Federation headquarters was also very strange. Lieutenant General Hu Yin, who had celebrated his 40th birthday on Planet S 3-4 months ago, looked at the two nameless trees outside the window with an expressionless face. Looking at the falling snow between the leaves, his brows were deeply furrowed, and no one knew what he was thinking. The fact that the Federation government could ignore Du Shaoqing's strong opposition and choose this young general to take over the position of the frontline commander-in-chief was naturally after careful consideration. Lieutenant General Hu Yin had graduated from the 1st Military Academy and had commanded several beautiful local battles in the West Woods border and Left Sky Starfield, especially the jump battle on Planet Yellow Disaster. As the Deputy Chief of Staff at the time, he had designed the 3-star defense strategy, which played an extremely crucial role in sniping the Empire's field forces. In the eyes of many people, this person was the Federation military's most proficient general after General Changtian, and was very suitable for the current situation on planet Emohua. Such an excellent general would naturally not be as contemptuous as Du Shaoqing had said, and would only praise the president and help Li Jiedu place his trusted aides on the front line. The bloody battle on planet Emohua in the past 2 months was enough to prove his strong execution ability. Unfortunately, he was executing the strategic plan left behind by Du Shaoqing. If one wanted to talk about merits or leave a smile on the history books, it would not be his turn. General Hu Yin looked at the strangely straight trees outside the window and the strange gray-black snow between the trees. A strange smile mixed with self-mockery and coldness appeared on his lips. According to the information sent back from the front line, the battle at the Straits had already been decided. No matter how the Empire's Wolf Fong Mek Brigade struggled, they would be completely annihilated in the end. Hu Yin firmly believed that the princess would definitely not dare to ignore the reinforcements he had placed at the front line of the Hongduan Mountains. He had even started to think about how he should ask for credit for his teacher's son after the battle. The battle between the 4 mechanicals in the Southwest War Zone was extremely intense. The thousands of square kilometers of graphite mining towns were said to have been turned into countless piles of rubble under the terrifying firepower of both sides. Hu Yin did not care about that side. The General Staff Department had already drawn up a plan of gradual retreat. As the Commander-in-Chief, he would welcome the return of those heroic troops in the most professional manner, but he would not have any emotional fluctuations, because those were all Du Shaoqing's direct troops. As for that unknown NTR troop, Lieutenant General Hu Yin slowly walked back to the table and silently looked at the electronic map on the hologram table. Looking at the mottled color blocks that represented both sides, his brows that had just become slightly relaxed, once again furrowed. After this battle, it would be difficult for the Empire's troops to launch a strong counterattack. On the contrary, in order to deal with the Federal Forces' backup plan, the other side could only gradually retreat to the northern plains. Under the circumstances where the Federal Forces did not receive a clear order from the rear, they would also choose a conservative defensive posture. After struggling and groaning in the midst of slaughter and blood for 3 whole years, the Mo Hua planet was about to welcome an extremely rare and precious opportunity to take a breather. In the following 6 months of peace, as the Commander-in-Chief of the Classic Academy, Hu Yin felt that his most urgent task was to restore the morale of the troops. I don't have the tolerance of Commander Shaoqing. My troops can't tolerate any bandits without a sense of discipline. Their existence is a disgrace to the federal military, but the necessary support still needs to be there. Tomorrow, the General Staff will send a reconnaissance team based on Colonel He Lei's proposal. In a dark corner of the office stood a middle-aged man in a dark green military uniform. Although he had been maintaining absolute silence, his arms were unconsciously twisting from time to time. As a high-ranking official of the Bureau of Proclamation, he was clearly not used to the sense of restraint of the military uniform. His name was Barry, the highest-ranking official sent to the front lines by the Federation government's Joint Investigation Department. When Du Shaoqing was ordered to return to the capital ring, the biggest obstacle for the secret department to enter the front lines no longer existed. Thus, he and his subordinates followed General Hu Lian's battleship to the Mo planet. Lack of a sense of discipline is a very serious problem. Barry rubbed his shoulder, the small eye tattoo on his left upper arm appearing particularly sinister. However, his tone was very gentle. The more serious problem is that the NTR unit has more than 20 former members of the Nutshell Company's 7th team. They were mercenaries and have committed numerous crimes in the past. Their loyalty to the Federation is very questionable. I don't agree with your opinion, General Hu Lian said calmly, as if he was reciting a book. Barry smiled slightly, knowing that the general would not express his opinion on this matter. He continued speaking softly. Their relationship with that Empire person is too deep. No one knows if they have still been in contact in these past 3 years. More importantly, according to the information from the Empire's underground resistance organization, that Empire person has already left the Tianjing planet. His target should be our planet. He raised his head, looked at the general, and said softly, "What did he come to the Mo planet for? Why has there been no news from that NTR unit for so many days? Did they meet up? What did they say when they met? What do they want to do?" "Sir General, I believe that this matter is extremely worthy of our vigilance. We should immediately begin investigating." The general pondered for a moment, or perhaps it could be said that he was not even thinking and was only pretending to be thinking. Then he nodded slightly and said in a deep voice, "Tomorrow, your investigation team will go with that reconnaissance unit." Barry nodded slightly and then walked out of this dark and strange room. Outside the door, he looked at the gray snow falling from the sky with an expressionless face, and the corners of his lips couldn't help but curl up into a mocking smile. As the Federation's most outstanding investigation expert, he was very disdainful of the general's clumsy performance. However, he did not understand why certain powers in the military would suddenly remember that 7th team that had long been unknown to the public. Was it for the sake of consolidating the military's morale? Or was there some other reason? That NTR unit had not been forgotten by the Federation military. Instead, it was a deliberate action. Their support or rescue would only bring them more danger. Chapter 891. 2 months ago, General Hu Lian officially took over all the federal forces on planet Mo. His staff had transferred Xiong Linquan, Gu Shifeng, De Wincy, and the other members of Group 7 in NTR ahead of time. Now, the new 17th Division NRT was deep in the Southwest War Zone, and there was no news of them. Looking back at the original staff transfer order, it seemed like a conspiracy, but in reality, that was not the case. The highest general of the Federation, the Bureau of Proclamation official with extremely high authority, in the eyes of these big shots, the NTR unit that disappeared in the Southwest War Zone, no matter what kind of arrogant history the members had, and how many of them were once war heroes of the Federation, were truly just small fry. The transfer order 2 months ago might have been some kind of purge and exclusion. The reason why it could not be considered a conspiracy was because it was more like a casual and simple method. The mission still needed people to do it, so the general lightly waved his sleeve and sent them into danger. It was that simple. Da Wincy was half kneeling on a rock in the forest, biting on a dry cigarette like a hooligan. The bright line of fire burned along the cigarette paper, and it had already swallowed up the second number 7. The smoke curled around his dark face, and it was so piercing that his eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at the person in front of him from the corner of his eyes. As the captain of NTR's 2nd Support Camp, which was closest to the Federal War Zone, he had already stayed in this lousy forest where even crows were too lazy to poop for 2 whole months. These days, he and his 3 subordinates were accompanied by insects in the fog. On one hand, They were worried about their comrades who had suddenly lost contact with them after crossing the mountains and entering the southwest war zone. On the other hand, they counted the decreasing supplies and endured the days with difficulty. Now that they had finally waited for reinforcements from the forward base, they did not expect that at the same time they would be waiting for these gloomy and smelly fellows. His mood was abnormally irritable, and he did not even care about the instant noodles that the scout squad leader sent over. He stared at the person in front of him and roared. How many fucking times do you want to ask? If this young master knew where they were right now, would I still be squatting here like a rabbit? A second lieutenant in a light yellow military uniform stood in front of him and questioned him in a very serious tone. The NTR unit has 2 microfilter radios, and according to the records of the Electronic Information Unit, the day after you crossed over these mountains, you received the electronic screen fake overflow code. So I can't understand why there hasn't been any news from your unit after so many days. Where are they now, and what are they doing? Da Vinci was too lazy to pay attention to him. He waved his hand and called the squad leader over. He frowned and asked, Brother, are you here to support or to interrogate? Do you think I'm a prisoner? What did that mean? And where did this guy come from? My file is still with the Ministry of Defense. The second lieutenant tidied up his uniform and replied, I've been transferred to the Joint Investigation Department. Although some of the words may not sound good, I must remind you that I have Level 4 charter authority. You must answer my questions. So he's a freak with small eyes. No wonder he's so annoying. Da Vinci's eyes fell on the blood-red eye pattern on the left upper arm of the other party's military uniform and said in disgust, Fuck, when did you have the guts to come to the front line? The expression of the second lieutenant of the Small Eyes Combat Unit was still calm. He coldly looked at Da Vinci's face behind the smoke and suddenly asked, Are you still in contact with Sulu? The cigarette that had not burned out its life slipped from Da Vinci's dry lips and fell into the crack of the stone under his feet. A few sparks burst out and were instantly extinguished. That was a name that many people did not want to mention, but could not forget. Da Vinci slowly narrowed his eyes. He vaguely guessed that some people probably thought of the 7th group again. He looked up at the second lieutenant's face and said indifferently, You better be careful. People like us are prone to flipping out. You must answer the question truthfully, the second lieutenant said with a gloomy expression. Answer the fuck. Da Vinci replied expressionlessly. Then he slowly stood up from the stone and looked down at the officer of the Small Eyes Combat Unit. He reached out and pulled the second lieutenant's epaulette on the shoulder of the second lieutenant. Grandson, I'm the worst in the 7th group, but I'm still a captain. When you get to my level, it won't be too late to fucking show off. As night fell, the forest became lively. In the tent of the NTR unit's second reception camp, Da Vinci was silent for a long time with a 37 brand cigarette in his mouth. He was not recalling the glorious past of the 7th group represented by that name. Instead, he was waiting for a certain piece of news. His subordinate behind him took off his headphones and whispered a few words behind him. Da Vinci's brows furrowed even more. Before Gu Shifeng set up Camp Number 2, she had left him some very useful monitoring equipment. Originally, it was used to increase the monitoring strength of the outer edge of the forest. Now, it was used to eavesdrop on the private conversations of the investigation team. Captain, those guys have the authority. You can't go against them. But if we all go back to the forward base for questioning, what will happen when the troops come back? Da Vinci frowned and said, I keep feeling that something is wrong with this matter. Without the support, it will be more difficult to support the people in front. These investigation team members don't know too much inside information. I have to find a way to get to Camp Number 2. If old Gu is still alive, I'll get him to find out what happened in the base. He looked at his subordinates in the tent and said calmly after a pause, Tomorrow, you guys go back with the investigation team. Don't object. You're not part of the 7th group. No one will make things difficult for you. Captain, what about you? A soldier from the West Woods asked anxiously. There's no movement on the other side of the mountain. Who knows if old Gu and the others are still in Camp Number 2. Later, I'll slip away first. Whether or not they're there, I have to go and take a look. Otherwise, I won't give up. Slip away? That's a deserter from the battlefield. You'll be court-martialed. Another soldier said uneasily. Da Vinci threw the cigarette, but to the ground, and crushed it with the hard soles of his military boots. He said, "Fuck, I'd rather be killed as a deserter than go to prison." The seventh group, who had been in the mercenary world of the Nutshell Company for a long time, had followed Magnolia to commit murder and arson, and had followed Sulu to do countless fierce deeds, such as raiding Charter Square. They had fought bravely and skillfully on the battlefield against the Empire, and had also been tainted with Professor Yu Chunghai's undisciplined and tough character. This was a group of strange existences in the army. Whether it was the oldest group members or the latecomers like Da Vinci, they seemed to never have the words such as a sense of discipline and soldier's honor in their minds. It had to be admitted that this style was not suitable for any situation, at least in a frontal battlefield where a sense of discipline and obedience was required. It was not wrong for the Du Shaoqing of the past and the current Hu Lien to regard them as a group of bandits. Because he didn't want to be interrogated endlessly, because he didn't want to lose face in the black prison, and because he was worried about his brothers and comrades who had disappeared in the Southwest Theater of Operations, Da Vinci decided to slip away secretly without hesitation. However, it was his decision that led to a series of subsequent events. When he was about to use the darkness of the night to sneak into the forest and then cross the mountains to find his troops, the second lieutenant with a gloomy expression and the 7 small-eyed soldiers of the Special Forces appeared in front of him. At this time, the stars were bright, and they penetrated through the dense forest. The vision was excellent. Da Vinci spat and found that he had underestimated these Special Forces soldiers who looked like they were made of wood. He thought that it was extremely embarrassing for him, a member of the 7th group, to have his escape route cut off. The soldiers in the tents in the camp heard the commotion outside, including the reconnaissance squad and Da Vinci's 3 subordinates. They all rushed out with guns in their hands. Under the starlight and the accompaniment of the insects, more than a dozen federal soldiers entered a standoff. The situation at that time was not tense. No matter how undisciplined and arrogant Da Vinci was, it was impossible for him to pick up a gun and shoot at his own people. He smiled awkwardly and was about to say something, but then he went back to sleep. "You dare to resist the investigation?" The second lieutenant of the small-eyed unit looked at him coldly and mocked. "I think that no matter what the follow-up investigation results, just based on the previous scene, you will definitely not be a captain. In the evening, you said that you want me to be in your position, and that's it?" The members of the 7th group were extremely thick-skinned. Otherwise, their survival rate on the battlefield would not be so high. Listening to the other party's sarcastic provocation, Da Vinci smiled slightly and did not care. He also made the Lan Xiaolong shrug that was one of the 7th group's standard actions, along with Su Li's narrowing of eyes. His shrug had ruined the whole thing. Perhaps the starlight that night was too bright and blurred, or perhaps the insects that night were too loud because it was mating season. The scouts who had just rushed out of the tent happened to be at the back of the confrontation scene and did not see his movements clearly. They did not hear the second lieutenant's words and did not know whether Da Vinci had a gun or not. In the blurry vision of the night, they only saw Da Vinci shrug his shoulders. As an excellent scout, he was not as excellent as the 7th group to always maintain a calm and relaxed state of mind. Therefore, one of the scouts instinctively judged that he was going to shoot. So he pulled the trigger first. The barrel of the gun spewed out smoke, and the sound of bullets fired rang out. When the first gunshot tore through the silence of the forest, countless bullets flew in all directions. After a short 3 seconds, following the second lieutenant's angry roar, the gunshots abruptly stopped. Da Vinci slowly turned his somewhat stiff body and found that the team members he had been with for 3 years were all lying in a pool of blood. At the same time of death, the first 4 scouts and a Special Forces soldier of the small-eyed unit were killed by the bullets fired by the 3 team members. Da Vinci frowned, and his narrowed eyes gradually turned red, just like the bloody wound on his shoulder at this time. A submachine gun lay quietly on the wetland at his feet. Gunshots rang out again. 27 seconds later, Da Vinci was shot in the waist again. He killed 3 experts of the small-eyed Special Forces at the cost of this. Like an injured wild tiger, he roared and rushed into the dense forest. Chapter 892. A total of 14 people from the Federation's investigation department and the reconnaissance team went to Camp Number 1 in the woods, but only 7 people came back, and they did not bring back the target of their investigation. Because of the shooting incident that happened that night and Leonardo's escape, the FOB was in an uproar. According to the confessions of the Small Eyes Special Forces and the reconnaissance team, the federal military headquarters quickly determined the nature of this vicious incident. Several major agencies, including the Military Law Office, immediately began an in-depth investigation. They investigated the new 17th Division that the NTR unit belonged to, as well as the officers who had close contact with Leonardo. The evidence was irrefutable and shocking. Many officers of the new 17th Division were invited into the darkroom to drink tea, but they couldn't feel too much resentment or anger. They were only bewildered and confused. Why would Da Vinci do such an inconceivable thing? Lieutenant General Hu Lien stared coldly at Commander. He lay in front of him and waved his hand to stop him from asking. He said coldly, "I only need you to explain why your subordinate reacted so violently when the reinforcements arrived. If he resisted the investigation because he was emotionally unsatisfied, then how do you explain why this deserter had the guts to shoot at his colleagues?" The green stubble on He Lei's chin quickly withered in the past few days. He stared with bloodshot eyes and said, "General, Leonardo is a very excellent grassroots officer. Although I admit that there are some problems with his sense of discipline, I can guarantee that he would never shoot at his colleagues in cold blood. There must be a misunderstanding." Hearing the word misunderstanding, the coldness in Hu Lien's eyes became more and more intense. He picked up the stack of notes from the table and slammed them on He Lei's face. He roared, "Misunderstanding? Read it yourself." 2 rounds of bullets turned 3 Special Forces members into a hornet's nest. This is also a misunderstanding. The director of the Bureau of Proclamation, Bailey, had been quietly standing in the corner, watching the officers who came into the General Staff Department to plead for mercy. He watched Hu Lien curse everyone as shit. At this time, he suddenly walked over and took out a tiny chip from his jacket pocket. He looked at He Lei and said softly, "Commander He, according to the Bureau of Proclamation's chip, Leonardo has been seriously injured and is fleeing in the direction of Akihabara. According to the investigation team's judgment, he is preparing to defect to the Empire's side." He Lei was furious. He grabbed Director Bailey's collar and roared, "Fuck your defection. If it weren't for you bastards messing around, how would this have happened to my troops? If he isn't a traitor, why is this deserter heading towards Akihabara?" Lieutenant General Hu Lien pushed the tracking chip in front of He Lei and said expressionlessly, "Actually, the so-called roadmap is not the key. The moment he dared to shoot at his comrades, he was already a traitor." The tired He Lei narrowed his eyes and rubbed them. He did not know what to say or how to defend his subordinates. He only felt that everywhere he looked, there was dry and hard excrement. They would rather raise their guns and resist than come back for investigation. It seems that there's indeed something wrong with that NTR unit. What makes me even more vigilant is whether that deserter called Leonardo has noticed something. The Bureau of Proclamation's positioning system can only cover an area of 20 kilometers to the east of the forest. After crossing that mountain range, there's no signal feedback. We believe that he is heading towards Akihabara, which is close to the Empire's war zone, but it is also possible that he is heading west along the foothills. Director Bailey tugged at the overly tight military uniform of the Small Eyes Department. He frowned and pointed at a certain spot on the electronic map. If NTR Unit's Camp Number 1 has not been destroyed, it should be in this valley. Leonardo might want to go there to meet up with his team members. He turned his head to look at the table and saw that Lieutenant General Hu Lien was resting with his eyes closed. He could not help but subconsciously cough twice and continue. NTR Unit's Camp Number 1 has a standard of 14 people. 4 of them are from Old Seven's team. What's even more troublesome is that the electronic warfare expert called Gu Shifeng is also there. Seeing that Lieutenant General Hu Lien was still expressionless, Director Bailey sighed his heart and continued to introduce Gu Shifeng. This person is the best electronic warfare expert in the federal military. He is especially good at setting up electronic triggering networks in the forest. Back then, when the Iron 7th Division arrested him in the capital's Ministry of Finance, he had just completed the device to blow up the entire building. Commander Yu Qinghai did his best to protect him, but then he was demoted and sent to the kitchen. However, this person's ability is not to be underestimated. Hearing this, Lieutenant General Hu Yin finally opened his eyes slowly and said with an expressionless face, "Even if he is the most powerful terrorist, what use is he on the battlefield? But what if NTR unit is still alive? What if Da Vinci, Gu Shifeng, and the others meet up with NTR unit?" Director Bailey asked with a frown. "What if NTR unit discovers our intentions? Right now, there's a Federation captain who escaped at the last moment and cold-bloodedly killed several Federation soldiers. No matter how you look at it, he is a traitor." Hearing Director Bailey's three ifs, Lieutenant General Hu Yin raised his eyebrows in disgust and reprimanded in a deep voice. "Investigating unstable elements in the military is the responsibility of the Joint Investigation Department. Hunting down deserters is also part of your job. The General Staff Department will not care about this matter." Intentions? What intentions? Director Bailey opened his mouth slightly and spread his hands. He wanted to say something, but he did not know what to say. Where it began is where it will end. Lieutenant General Hu Yin stood up and looked at him as he reprimanded without any trace of politeness. "The trouble you caused must be resolved as soon as possible. No matter how you explain it, in everyone's eyes, it can only be that Small Eyes is targeting NTR unit, or rather, targeting Old 7. Isn't this a conspiracy? The truth is not important, but I can tell you for sure that many people in the Army will think that this is a conspiracy of the Federation's investigation department. You guys with ugly blood eyes painted on your arms." Lieutenant General Hu Yin patted Director Bailey's collapsed right shoulder and said calmly, "Since it's a conspiracy, it can't be exposed. Since it has started, it must end quickly. 500 people from Small Eye Special Forces came this time to patrol the Southwest War Zone. Maybe you can find your wanted targets. If you're lucky, you might even encounter that NTR team." Hearing this, Director Bailey could no longer keep calm. Although he was the most professional investigator and had the high-level authority that gave him the qualifications to look at everything indifferently, seeing the biggest scapegoat on the front line being smashed like this, if he did not try to struggle, he would only end up with his head broken and bleeding. "Commander, my department is only in charge of investigation, not combat." He looked at the general's expressionless face and knew that this alone would not be able to convince the highest commander on the front line. He undid the collar button that made it almost impossible for him to breathe, and, after a few nervous gasps, he said, "And how do we make NTR units shut up? If they have already died under the guns of the Empire, then it doesn't matter, but what if they are still alive? Dongfang Yu is in that NTR unit. Although he is no longer the commander of Iron 7 Division, who in the unit doesn't know that he is Shaoqing's hardcore supporter? How do we explain this to Du Shaoqing?" He tried to use that name to make the other party wary, but unexpectedly, General Hu Yin turned to look at him coldly and said, "As the commander-in-chief of the Federation's frontline enemy, I only need to answer to Chairman Li Jiedu. As for how General Du Shaoqing thinks about the problem, I don't need to care and I don't care." Director Bailey was silent for a long time, the faint light in his eyes gradually turning into the usual indifference. He didn't need to clench his teeth. He only needed to weigh the pros and cons. Lieutenant General Hu Yin was the most loyal follower of Li Jiedu, chairman of the Federation's Joint Staff Committee. Due to some abnormal fanaticism, he secretly decided to clean up the new 17th Division. The general insisted that only by washing away the stench of Su Lu and that damned Iron 7 Division and returning the soldiers to a clear and bright atmosphere could this Federation's mighty division regain its glory in the hands of the most qualified person to have it, wave in the wind of the battlefield, and once again become the indomitable banner of the Lees of Philadelphia. Director Bailey was a high-ranking official of the Federation's Bureau of Proclamation. He was currently the highest-ranking officer of the Federation's Federation Investigation Department stationed at the front lines. He was loyal to President Pabre, but this operation did not receive the government's authorization. The investigation of the NTR unit was more based on some kind of instinct. For a secret organization, investigation, intimidation, torture, and cleansing were the sun, rain, and dew that they needed to survive. It was the foundation of their survival. If it didn't do these things, what was the need for them to exist in this world? The target of this operation was a fugitive, a camp that might have already been destroyed, and an NTR unit with only 70 people who should have all died. This was really just a small matter. Lieutenant General Hu Lien and Director Bailey were actually very intelligent people. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to occupy such an important position of power. However, when they tried to enter a field that they weren't good at, a general who didn't play with sand tables wanted to play with political methods. An official of the Bureau of Proclamation didn't play with the data sequence on the workbench and stared blankly at the charter network. Instead, he tried to weigh the pros and cons like a businessman. This could only be described as stupid. A small matter was about to evolve into a huge matter. Moreover, at this very moment, none of the people involved on planet Mo could predict how far this matter would ultimately go. Da Vinci was struggling to escape while covering his bloody stomach in the forest. Gu Shifeng was using the morning light to read the cooking program for white meat in Camp Number 1. The Federation squad, covered in dust, drilled out a hole in the ground. They narrowed their eyes at the unfamiliar sunlight of Sail City and aimed their black gun barrels at 2 Empire prisoners who were carrying a stretcher. Under a certain building, a weak Empire elder was comforting his crying granddaughter. At the end of a secluded alley, a few stray dogs were greedily fighting over broken human corpses. A few blocks away, a small-eyed man wearing tattered clothes carried a heavy backpack. He silently and vigilantly moved through the city riddled with holes, searching for his target. People didn't know how the story would develop, how fate would arrange the meeting, what kind of choices they would face after the meeting, and what kind of changes these choices would bring to this world. Chapter 893. All the resources would become military resources during wartime. Mo planet was rich in high-strength graphite ores, which was the resource that was most urgently needed during the war. Therefore, when the war started, the Southwest mining area naturally became the Southwest War Zone. It became the hot land that the Federation and the Empire desperately fought for. Then, it gradually became a wasteland under the damage of gunpowder and bullets. Sail City, which was located in the center of the Southwest War Zone, was the largest settlement of workers in the Empire's graphite mining area. After thousands of years of mining and cultural accumulation, this city had brought a pleasant atmosphere. The old-style buildings were neatly arranged on both sides of the street. The big sycamore trees stretched their broad leaves peacefully, bringing shade and happiness to the people walking on the street. Now, this city had long become a wasteland. The stubborn sycamore trees were neatly cut down by the army and fell on the street as a barrier. The old-style buildings were painted black, their front teeth were broken, and they were on the verge of collapsing. There was no beauty to speak of. The fierce battle lasted for 3 years. The gunshots seemed to have echoed in this city for 3 years without stopping for a moment. The seemingly quiet and empty alley could have a huge explosion at any time. Only a few decaying beams of the clock tower were left. No one knew how many snipers were hiding in the dark city ruins, looking for the enemy, ready to pull the trigger at any time. There were too many dangers hidden in the ruins. Every minute, there were soldiers wearing military uniforms who fell and then couldn't get up again. Occasionally, there would be soldiers who were lucky enough to stand up, but who knew that they would fall again in a few days. Of the original residents of Sail City, only a small portion of them had time to evacuate before the war. Most of the civilians could only helplessly hide in their own homes, waiting for a rocket to blow their wedding photos and themselves into pieces at the same time, or for the Federation soldiers to violently kick open their doors. 3 years that seemed to be longer than life had passed. There were very few civilians who were lucky enough to survive in this city. They hid in the cellars from fear to numbness, from anger and sadness to numbness, from passion and excitement to numbness, numbness to survival, numbness to waiting for death. However, in recent months, even numbness had become an extravagant hope. Foray City had turned from a hot land to a wasteland, and now it had turned into a scorched land. The arrival of death seemed even more reckless and casual. In a strategy that Du Shaoqing had drafted before he left, the Southwest War Zone was determined to be an important target to provide cover for the battle in the Straits. The four federations' reorganized mechanics ignored the layers of barriers that the dynasty had set up and launched continuous attacks without any regard for their lives. The dense cluster of missiles tore through the gray sky, and hundreds of close air combat jets roared as they dove down, leaving trails of fire behind them. In such a terrifying war environment, it was not easy to survive like a wild dog. Shed Kaputanovich was an ordinary old watchmaker in Sale. He rubbed his rheumatism that was becoming more and more serious. Looking at the broken vat in the corner, the wrinkles on his face became even deeper than the pain. His dry and gray lips moved slightly as he counted how many things were left in the cellar. There were only 2 bags of compressed biscuits left. These were the spoils of war that the old watchmaker had risked his life to climb out of the cellar in the middle of the night and loot from a Federation soldier on the street last month. The oil lamp without a discharge was almost gone. The lamp hanging in the cellar was so dim that it seemed like it was about to cry. What was even more despairing was that the miniature circulating water filtration system in the corner that his son had spent a lot of money to buy before the war had finally stopped working after stubbornly holding on for 3 years. Azala, don't fix it. Come over to Grandpa. I have something to say to you. The old watchmaker looked at his granddaughter, who was busying herself in front of the water table with a gaze full of love, and said emotionally, "After your father died, who would still be fiddling with such a high-class thing?" Azala was 16 years old this year. She had a head of beautiful dark chestnut curly hair. Because of malnutrition, her eyes were a little sunken, but they made her look even more beautiful. She turned around and looked at the old watchmaker. "Grandpa, what should we do? There haven't been any knocking sounds from the cellar over at Old Tom's house for 3 months." The old watchmaker sighed and scratched his sparse hair. "They probably aren't there anymore. Later at night, I'll go through the waterway and see if there's any water left in their water tank." The young girl, Azala, frowned and protested softly. "Grandpa, that's too dangerous. Your leg isn't convenient. If anyone has to go, it should be me. How can I let a little girl take away an old man's job?" The old watchmaker chuckled, took out a hunting rifle from the black cabinet behind him, and stood up with great difficulty. "Grandpa, I'm already 16 years old." The young girl, Azala, pouted unhappily. The old watchmaker was slightly startled. He frowned deeply and said with uncontrollable sadness, "Yes, my beautiful Azala, you've been with this old man in this dark place for 3 whole years. In order to survive in this ruined city, other than luck, one only needed to be strong, strong, and strong." So the old watchmaker did not allow himself to be immersed in the harmful emotions of sadness for too long. He took a deep breath to calm himself down, and then carefully checked the hunting rifle. After confirming that it was well maintained, he nodded in satisfaction. "Azala, I've told you many times. Every time you leave the cellar, you have to fight." The old man looked at his granddaughter lovingly and gently stroked her slightly knotted dark chestnut curly hair. "Some people in this city have surrendered to the enemy. Some are fighting, and some are waiting. I'm old, but sometimes I can still fight those invaders. But you're a girl. You should wait." The young girl, Azala, squatted in front of the old watchmaker and said with certainty, "Can't I do anything but wait? If I had a gun, I could kill a few Federation people. When you live to my age, you'll understand that everything in this world is trivial, including war. Happy people only need to do one thing." "What is it?" Azala opened her big, curious eyes. Her pupils were as beautiful as gemstones. The old watchmaker said with a tone of truth, "Live as long as you live. At this moment, a few muffled sounds came from the broken iron sheet in the corner of the cellar. The old watchmaker's expression suddenly became nervous. Above the broken iron sheet was a ventilation pipe made of pig iron, and the sound from the ground could be heard clearly. The muffled sounds continued. The old watchmaker frowned and listened for a while. After confirming that it was gunfire, he asked in a low voice, "Is the door closed?" "No," Azula replied. The old watchmaker did not have time to scold the girl. He signaled for her to lock the iron door at the entrance of the cellar. Although the entrance was disguised, there was still a possibility that the soldiers on the ground would discover it. In the past 3 years, the grandfather and granddaughter had heard gunshots from the ground countless times. They had encountered such situations before, so the young girl, Azula, was not nervous. She lifted the stained hem of her dress and jumped to the door like a deer. Footsteps came from outside the door. The old watchmaker opened his mouth slightly, and a look of despair appeared on his face. He subconsciously lowered his head and pushed the magazine away, and then reached for the cold bullets beside him. The young girl, Azula, covered her mouth in horror to stop herself from screaming. She ran to the door, but before she could reach out, the heavy iron door was kicked open. The iron door hit the young girl's delicate body heavily, and she was knocked to the ground 2 meters away. Just like that, she fainted. Looking at the 2 Federation soldiers who rushed in, the old watchmaker howled in anger and despair. He wanted to raise his gun to protect his last home with his life. However, the watchmaker was really old. After 3 years of torment, his hands, which used to be able to repair the most delicate watch cores, were trembling and unstable. He couldn't press the bullet into the barrel for a long time. His keen eyesight, which he was most proud of, had long become muddy. He could only vaguely see the enemy's figure. The Federation soldier who rushed into the cellar pulled the trigger at the old man without hesitation. The bullet hit his chest and abdomen, leaving 3 horrifying bullet holes under his ribs. Blood flowed out continuously. The old watchmaker fell from the chair, but he did not stop breathing immediately. He panted and looked at the Federation soldiers. With the last of his strength, he begged in the most humble and desperate tone, "Please let my granddaughter go." The one who rushed into the cellar was a Federation captain and his orderly. In the previous fierce battle, the captain's unit was directly crushed into a bloody pulp by an Imperial mecha battalion. He saw the opportunity and quickly left the battle zone. He broke into this residential building behind the street and did not expect to luckily find cellar. The Federation captain's military uniform was in tatters. He looked extremely haggard. Right now, his mood was also abnormally irritable. He looked at the old Imperial man who looked like a skinny dog on the ground and growled. "What did he say?" "I don't know," the orderly replied honestly. The captain spat on the ground and pulled the trigger again without hesitation. The bullet pierced through the shriveled body for the second time. It did not bring out much blood, but it directly brought death. In the Imperial Missouri Hua planet, Fail City, an ordinary old watchmaker named Shed Kabdanovich ended his life just like that in this dark cellar. The young girl, Azula, woke up. Her face was pale as she looked at the old man lying in a pool of blood. Her gem-like eyes suddenly lost all their luster. She was as ignorant as a stone. She knelt on the ground and crawled to the old man's side. She reached out her weak and trembling arms and gently hugged him. The Federation captain frowned at her. He reached out and grabbed the young girl's curly hair. He roughly pulled her up, then saw that pale and sorrowful but still tender face. The young girl stared at his face. The stone in her eyes began to burn. She stubbornly raised her head and then prepared to shout. She believed that there must be Imperial troops on the ground. The captain tried to cover her lips, but Azula bit him hard. The captain groaned and looked at his bleeding hand. He hit the girl hard on the ground like an injured wild dog. After a moment of silence, the captain's expression gradually became cruel and strange. He stared at the crying girl who was half kneeling at his feet. He reached out and tore off the thin skirt on the girl's body. He used his bleeding hand to cover her face and pressed her down. After kicking off his pants, he began to gasp for breath, just like a dog. My current confusion is that if I continue to write like this This episode will end much later than I thought. Chapter 894. Azula had been raped. Azula's grandfather had died. Azula had cried. Azula's tears had dried up. Azula was still alive. Azula was no longer alive. She sat on the filthy ground in a daze. Her equally filthy skirt covered her slender legs and the girl's blood. After venting his lust on the Imperial girl's body, the captain of the Federation suddenly felt a little disgusted. The delicate girl's skin and beautiful dark chestnut hair that made him feel incomparably firm on the brink of death now made him feel a little disgusted. Men who had just ejaculated were usually eunuchs, but they often thought of themselves as saints. The captain woke up from his deranged mood, feeling a little irritated at the thought that he had actually raped a lowly Imperial woman. He roughly kicked away the girl, sitting on the floor, cursing as he walked to the water stand in the corner. He poured out the water bottle and used the last bit of water to hastily clean the mucus and blood between his legs. That water was the last hope for the old watchmaker and his granddaughter to live on. It was the last thing that Azra's father had left in this world. If it were any other time, she would have protected the water at all costs. But now that the old watchmaker had become a cold corpse, she had lost the will to live. She could only stare blankly at the Federation soldier, watching him use the most precious water to wash away the dirtiest and most precious things. "Boss, this girl is quite pretty. She's much less hairy than those beast-like Imperial women. Is it because she's young?" The orderly leaned against the door, leaning on his gun as he spoke to the captain in a fawning tone. The captain looked back at him and saw the blood vessels in the orderly's eyes, as well as the rising thirst that could not be quenched. He couldn't help but laugh mockingly and wave his hand in agreement. The bearded orderly let out a hoarse howl of joy and dragged the girl to a corner of the cellar. He took off his military uniform, revealing his body hair that was even denser than the Imperial people's. He roughly lifted the girl's skirt and pressed her down viciously. At this moment, a muffled sound came from the iron door of the cellar. Smoke and dust flew everywhere. The two iron doors that were locked were actually shaken open from the outside. The dust in the cellar blocked the dim light of the oil lamp. Vaguely, a burly figure broke in just like that. Behind the burly figure, another 4 or 5 men drilled into the cellar like lightning. Their movements were particularly simple and powerful. They raised the cold standard guns in their hands and aimed at the captain of the Federation who was tying his belt, as well as the naked orderly who was preparing to move in the corner. They lowered their voices and roared, "Captain, surrender, and I'll spare your life. Put down the gun in your hand." The captain of the Federation had his hands on the waistband of his trousers, and his orderly had his hands on the girl's waist. Since they weren't holding the gun, they couldn't put it down, and they couldn't surrender the gun and avoid being killed. Looking at the murderous men who rushed in, the captain of the Federation fell into despair. He noticed that the submachine gun was still at least 2 steps away from him. There was no way he could resist. A moment later, the eyes of the captain of the Federation lit up. He noticed that although the men who rushed into the cellar were speaking the language of the Empire, they were very unfamiliar with it. It was very much like him who had received temporary training before the war. Because of a certain bright possibility, the captain excitedly breathed rapidly and said with a trembling voice, "Don't shoot. We are from the Federation." The dust gradually fell to the ground, and the light of the oil lamp spilled out. The tall figure walked out from the shadows and revealed his true face. The burly body of about 9 meters tall was wearing a tattered, bulletproof vest, revealing his strong muscles. His hair was extremely short and uneven, and it felt like countless needles were randomly piled there. New 17th Division, NTR, Xiong Linquan. "Who are you?" The burly man looked at the captain of the Federation and asked. Then his eyes slowly moved down and landed on the ugly thing hanging between the captain's legs. His eyes narrowed, his straight eyebrows slightly furrowed, and his face turned slightly cold. In the Federation military's command system, Xiong Linquan was a person who had been missing for almost 2 months. In less than a week after the new 17th Division NTR entered the Southwest War Zone to carry out that damned mission, the four Federation reorganized machinists began that terrifying bloody battle. The continuous bombardment of Sail City and the destructive bombardment that did not distinguish between friend and foe caused the NTR troops that had entered this war zone early to fall into an extremely dangerous situation. The terrifying electronic shielding battle caused all channels to be blocked. The dark clouds spat out by the tragic battle covered the sky around the city. The few signal relay stations outside the atmosphere entered a semi-blind state, and the Federation's charter network could not capture the reference ships behind the necks of the NTR troops. What was even more troublesome, or perhaps even worse, was that although the NTR troops had received the electronic shielding fake codes from a base, the two microfilter radios of the troops were completely destroyed due to some inexplicable reason, such as being smashed by rocks. Thus, they became a lone army deep behind enemy lines without any support. Even the four reorganized machinists did not know of their existence. The northern suburbs had the highest concentration of Dynasty troops. While the NTR troops completed the secret mission with great difficulty, they unavoidably attracted the attention of the Dynasty's main forces. As they fled and fought, the troops suffered heavy casualties and were forced to infiltrate Sail City under desperate circumstances. Who knew how many snipers were hidden in the ruins? At that time, the city was still under the control of the Dynasty and had to be bathed in the concentrated airstrikes of the Federation every day. To them, who did not know, this was a cold graveyard. In order to survive under such extreme circumstances, the NTR troops held an impromptu battlefield meeting. They decided to split into two groups and hide there, waiting for the Federation's main forces to complete their strategic objective before making their move. Xiong Linquan and a few of the old members of Group 7 did not hesitate to choose the more difficult area. Dongfang Yu, who was supposed to be in command of the other group, was heavily injured in a battle and was also silently picked up by Xiong Linquan. Xiong Linquan's group had 14 people, including 6 lightly injured people and Dongfang Yu, who was lying on a stretcher. There were also 2 Dynasty captives captured during the last mission before infiltration. The 2 Dynasty captives were responsible for carrying the stretcher and taking care of the heavily injured Dongfang Yu. This mixed group of complicated members chose a warehouse behind Sail City's clock tower as their hiding spot. However, even they themselves did not expect that this battle would be so long and bloody. They were forced to hide in that warehouse for more than 40 days. Fortunately, luck returned at this time. Neither the Dynasty's Mecha Battalion nor the Federation's blind missiles on the streets discovered them. Just an hour ago, through a long period of observation at the sentry post, Xiong Linquan confirmed that the Federation military had ended the indiscriminate bombing and decided to start moving the group. However, just as the group passed through 2 streets under the cover of dusk, before they had time to sigh at the somewhat unfamiliar sunset and how good it was to be alive, they were almost discovered by a certain Dynasty's Mecha Battalion supporting the front lines. This group, which had already proven themselves on the battlefield, used the fastest speed and smallest movement to quietly avoid the 8 terrifying Wolfang mecha and broke into a residential building, preparing to temporarily hide there for a period of time. However, one of the team members discovered a crude entrance to a cellar behind them. Then, Xiong Linquan rushed in and saw the scene of murder and rape. "I am Captain Chen Chi of the base's Rapid Response Brigade." The captain awkwardly pulled up his pants, took a deep breath, and looked at Xiong Linquan. "Please report your military rank." Xiong Linquan looked at him expressionlessly. His empty left hand pulled open a corner of his bulletproof vest, revealing the epaulets sewn inside. Captain Chen Chi's expression changed drastically. He immediately stood at attention, performed a standard military salute, and said, "Hello, Lieutenant Colonel." Xiong Linquan looked at him silently and suddenly asked, "How does it feel to be raped?" The rest of the people in the room remained silent. They looked at the captain and his orderly. Other than the 2 Empire captives squatting in the corner, no one showed any disdain or disgust. It was not because they could accept this kind of thing, But as the NTR unit that took on the federal military's most dangerous mission, they were the group of people who had seen the most ugliness of life and death in the world, so they were somewhat numb. Xiong Linquan turned his head and glanced at the Empire woman in the corner. His eyes narrowed. He was a little surprised that she did not cry. Then he noticed that she was very young and very beautiful. She had a head of soft, dark chestnut hair, and under the ends of the hair was a smooth, delicate, and thin shoulder. There were several deep bloodstains. After a slight pause, he remembered with slight ridicule that in the Federation's propaganda, the people of the Empire were all beasts with hair growing on their bodies. There was always too much difference between propaganda and reality. Xiong Linquan never put down his gun. The black barrel was aimed straight between Captain Chen Shi's eyebrows. No matter if he was pulling up his pants or saluting, it did not tremble in the slightest. Captain Chen Shi felt some kind of inexplicable fear. He said with a hoarse and trembling voice, "Lieutenant Colonel Xiong, what do you want to do? Do you want to kill me for this Empire woman?" Xiong Linquan still did not put down the barrel of the gun. The captain's face suddenly turned ashen. He cried out miserably, "A company died in the hands of the Empire people. So what if I rape an Empire woman?" Xiong Linquan silently lowered his head. At the same time, he put down the single-barreled heavy gun in his hand and said, "If you can return to the base alive, go report yourself to the military law office. I know your number and name. If you don't go, you can imagine the consequences." The two captives squatting by the wall were covered in dust, but still could not hide the clear eyes of one of them. Looking at this scene, this captive whispered a few words of ridicule in a low voice. Xiong Linquan understood what this captive was saying. The other members in the room also understood. The general idea was to mock the hypocrisy of the Federation people. Since they did not dare to kill the captain and did not take him away, then the Empire woman would face more terrible humiliation later. The light in the cellar was very dim, and the atmosphere was very dim. It was so heavy that it made people unable to muster up much energy. In the dead silence, one of the members suddenly said, "If the boss was still here, I don't know what he would do." Hearing the word boss, Xiong Linquan turned around and roared angrily, "Shut up!" Everyone fell silent again because of this angry roar. Only one person in the cellar dared to speak. Lying on a stretcher, the former commander of the 1st Regiment of the Iron 7th Division, Dong Fengyu, mocked in a weak voice, "Your boss is from the Empire. Of course he would support the Empire people. Do you even need to ask?" The captive who had spoken earlier clearly understood the Federation language. A look of shock flashed through his eyes. He could not understand why the leader of these Federation people was from the Empire. Xiong Linquan put a silencer on the barrel of the gun, then raised his arm again and aimed at the corner of the cellar. He looked at the expressionless Empire woman expressionlessly and saw that her eyes were full of stubbornness and silent hatred. "No!" the captive shouted. Bang! Bang! 2 muffled sounds. Xiong Linquan pulled the trigger again. Captain Chen Shi and his orderly suddenly had 2 bloody holes between their eyebrows. They fell down just like that. Xiong Linquan looked at the dead captain and said, "The whole company died in battle, but the highest-ranking officer is still alive. That means you are a deserter." These words seemed to be an explanation to the members, but also seemed to be an explanation to himself. It might also be an explanation to the shocked Empire woman in the corner as to why he would shoot. Chapter 895. Arriving at the periphery of the Southwest War Zone by the Empire's transport aircraft, he hitched a ride to the town that was under continuous artillery fire. Sneaking into the ruins at night, Su Lu finally arrived at the place where Paul was captured according to the intelligence. After observing for more than 10 minutes, he quickly left and sneaked into the deeper night. Because the bombardment density of the Southwest War Zone was too high, the intensity of the electronic warfare was too terrifying, and because the lead-like heavy clouds above his head were too thick, when Su Lu first saw the dilapidated scene of Foray City on the hill, he lost contact with Philip. The black spaceship silently stayed in a certain asteroid belt outside the atmosphere of Mo Hua planet, and could no longer provide him with any more help. These days, he had been searching under the heavy gray clouds, in the town where missiles were flying, and on the deserted hillside. He had no companions, no travel companions, and no comrades. He just walked alone. Fortunately, he had long been used to walking and fighting alone. Being good at fighting alone did not mean that one could defeat all the enemies alone. Sula knew very well that on the magnificent and tragic battlefield, the strength of an individual was very insignificant. No matter which side of the battle launched a volley of grenades, he would be blown into meat paste. Therefore, he carefully hid his figure, gradually leaving the most dangerous streets and returning to the green hills in the suburbs. Only in the deepest night would he return to the city like a ghost. At night, he walked past the broken bell tower, jumped over the thick sycamore tree, wiped away the heavy dust on the window, and peeped at the messy floor of the warehouse. He carefully searched for all the slightest traces. Because of his determination or luck, he found the right path and saw the dark cellar, as well as the 3 corpses whose blood had long dried up. The battle between the two sides sounded every moment in every corner, even in the seemingly quiet hills and forests. In just 3 days, Sulu searched along the northeast edge of Foray City and witnessed 4 tragic street battles with his own eyes. He saw the Empire's Mecca and the Federation's armored vehicles colliding fiercely. He saw the waist of a Federation soldier being blasted in half by a howitzer fired from the Empire's position. He saw the legs of an Empire medic being severed by Federation machine gun bullets. He screamed in agony as he crawled futilely towards his position. He saw many youths screaming as they died, and then fell silent. The Empire was related to him by blood, and the Federation was related to his emotions. No matter how desperate the battle was, Sulu could not do anything other than remain silent. He could not help either side in the battle. It was very painful for him to move his butt back and forth on the 2 chairs full of blades. The night was getting darker. A round and white moon slowly rose from the horizon in the east, generously illuminating the world through the gaps below the dark clouds in the southwest theater of operations. Sulu was lying in the camp pit that he dug in the evening. Looking at the full moon in the sky, he felt a slightly cold and wet sensation coming from below his body. He cupped his left hand into a ball and covered the cigarette butt. Bringing it to his lips, he inhaled deeply, blinked his eyes, and then turned around to look at the city behind him that was shrouded in darkness. Then he narrowed his eyes, because he saw a girl in a white dress suddenly appear on the street that was full of wudong tree limbs and bomb scars. The thin white dress hung down on her thin body. Because of the dirt, it was extremely dark. However, in such a silent and dangerous night, it was as white as a handful of snowflakes that made people pity her. Su Li's eyesight was very sharp. Even in such a dark night, with the help of the fading moonlight in the sky, he could clearly see the details of the buildings several kilometers away, not to mention the street that was only 500 meters away from him. The girl in the white dress looked very tired, but her expression was extremely numb, as if she had no vitality at all. Her cheeks were pale, and there were bloodstains on her dress. It was unknown where she was wounded. Sula narrowed his eyes. He didn't know why this girl would appear on the street of Foray City at night, like a lonely ghost. It should be noted that although it was already night, this city was still very dangerous. A battle could break out at any time, and stray bullets would occasionally cut through the silent night sky. Could it be that she was really a lonely ghost? Seeing the girl in the white dress walking toward the corner of the street in a daze, Sulu narrowed his eyes even more. During the day, he had confirmed that there was a troop of soldiers of the Empire stationed at the end of the street. The Night Tiger Regiment, which was famous for its cruelty and ruthlessness, would definitely pull the trigger on anyone who dared to appear in front of their defense line without hesitation, no matter if the person was from the Federation or the Empire. Sulu seemed to see the girl's body being cut in half by the cold bullets in the next moment. His narrowed eyes suddenly relaxed, and the moonlight on the horizon reflected into his eyes, very bright. The girl, Azra, had been wandering on the streets of Foray City for more than 2 days. Her will to live had been crushed by sadness, and she seemed to have no feelings or fear. She walked in the smoke and rubble, between the blazing day and the cold night. She couldn't feel the pain of stepping on hot bullet shells with her bare feet, and she couldn't hear the sizzling sound of flesh burning. She couldn't see the mecha battle that was often only a few hundred meters away, and she couldn't hear the loud sounds of heavy metal colliding. She didn't know anything. She just walked like this aimlessly, preparing to welcome death, or perhaps she didn't even think about death at all. There was a saying in the Empire, "Those who don't see death are not easily seen by death." Perhaps it was because even the cold and heartless god of creation felt that her experience was too tragic. Therefore, the girl, Azra, who had no family and no relatives, walked in a daze for a long time. Fortunately, she was not noticed by the dangerous stray bullets or the more dangerous soldiers. Why didn't I close the door? How could I forget to close the door? This dress is already so dirty. When Grandpa asked me to close the door, why did I pick it up? Why was I so slow? If I was faster, if I didn't pick up the dress, I definitely could have closed the door. Azra staggered along the street, full of debris. She numbly walked around the fallen sycamore trees when she saw them. Her body was so tired that it seemed like she could collapse at any time. She felt that she was a prisoner who didn't deserve forgiveness. She lowered her head in self-abasement and sorrow, looking at her blurry figure on the ground. She felt that it was a sin, and so she repeated those words in a tone as soft as a mosquito's. Turning around the corner, she heard a furious curse from the darkness in the distance. There was also the clear sound of gunshots. Azra looked up, tired and numb. She could vaguely see the soldiers in front of her. Her delicate brows furrowed slightly, and then she smiled in relief. She knew that everything was over. The leaves of autumn left the trees because the trees didn't care. The trees fell on the streets because the people didn't care. In this world, in this ruined city that was like an abyss on earth, who would care about the departure of the poor, weak girl, Azra? Except for that gust of wind that was starting to weaken on her frail body. Tut-tut. The shrill sound of Empire-made machine gun shots rang out continuously, and then suddenly stopped. A wind blew from the side of the street, sweeping up the fallen leaves on the ground and the small pebbles under the tree trunks. It also swept away the helpless girl's figure. In a low-lying area covered by bushes, Sulu rummaged through his military backpack for a long time. He found 2 boxes of instant nutrition packs and couldn't help but smile in surprise. He didn't use his military knife. Instead, he pressed the heating spring with his strong fingers. After a dozen seconds of silence, he walked to the side of the military pit and handed the food to the girl. He calmly said, "Eat." Azra ignored him. She just hugged her thin knees and stared blankly at her hometown on the other side of the bushes. Sulu sat down 2 meters away from the girl. He waited in silence for a long time. After confirming that she had no intention of speaking or eating, he stood up and walked over again. Using his steel-like left hand to open the girl's jaw, Sulu roughly stuffed the instant food into her mouth. Fortunately, the temperature had dropped a lot, so he didn't have to worry about burning her to death. "I still have a lot of things to do. Whether you deserve to be saved or not, since I saved you, I have to give you a full meal. There's no point in being a hungry ghost." In a very short time, he stuffed an entire box of food into the girl's mouth. Azra choked and coughed repeatedly. After taking the water that Sulu handed her, she couldn't be bothered to refuse anymore and drank a few mouthfuls. Then, the two fell silent again. The military pit in the hills was silent. After Sulu finished smoking a cigarette, he looked at the wounds on the back of the girl's torn white dress. He suddenly cursed under his breath and took out the medical kit to bandage her wounds. This time, Azala did not refuse, nor did he express his gratitude. Instead, he hugged his knees even tighter. His thin body shook back and forth nervously for a while. Suddenly, he buried his head in his hands and cried, "Close the door. The dress is so dirty. I shouldn't have lifted it. I'm too slow. I deserve to die." The girl suddenly broke down and cried, startling several nocturnal animals in the bushes. It also woke Sulu up. He stood up vigilantly and, at the same time, quickly turned on the filter detection device to monitor the surroundings of the hills to see if anyone was approaching. Then he heard the girl continue to cry. "If I wasn't me, Grandpa wouldn't have died. He's the best clockmaker. He can make the most punctual clocks." Be it friend or foe, they all agreed that Su Lu was a good person in the general sense. And he always had a certain trait, a trait that made people trust him easily and feel close to him. Because of this trait and the fact that he was saved, and also because of his noble accent and black hair, Su Lu won the trust of the girl, Azra. She didn't hide anything from him as she recounted her tragic experience in the past few days, including the fact that she was raped. Su Lu keenly noticed that the girl mentioned the Federation officers later. He then looked at the crying girl and said, "Your grandpa was right. Happy people only need to do one thing, and that is to live. You didn't do anything wrong, so you have the right to live happily." Chapter 896. Azala hugged her knees, opened her tearful eyes, looked at the ruined hometown that had already changed in the night, and asked in a low voice, "Then who did the wrong thing?" After a moment of silence, Su Lu replied directly, "I don't know." At his request, Azala forcibly suppressed her disgust for that memory and repeated it again in as much detail as possible. After hearing the girl's description of the burly Federation officer, he frowned, pulled out a photo from his watch many years ago, and asked, "Xiong Lin Quan, are you sure this is the pronunciation? Then take a look. Is it this person?" Azala was startled by the light screen that popped up on his watch. She stroked her chest with her little hand, and after calming down a little, she recognized the burly man on the light screen with a silly grin while holding a horrible big gun. She nodded and then added softly, "His hair is not so long." Su Lu thought for a moment, pulled out Paul's photo, and asked, "Is he the brave warrior of the Empire you mentioned?" Azala nodded again, then looked at Su Li's eyes curiously and asked in surprise, "How do you know it's them? And you have their photos?" Su Lu scratched his head, not knowing how to answer this question. He tilted his head and looked to the east, tried to avoid the girl's puzzled eyes, but he noticed that the brilliance on the horizon had disappeared. The round and white huge moon hid behind the thick lead clouds, and the weather-beaten and damaged Foray City was swallowed by the absolute night. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the thick clouds above his head that seemed to be dripping wet, but it never rained. Thinking of the vague information that Philip sent before entering the electronic chaos shield, he could not help but laugh self-deprecatingly. He came to Mo Hua Planet to find Paul, and he was also very worried about the old guys of Group 7, but he did not expect them to be together now, so his worries doubled. He looked back at the sad side of the Empire girl's face in silence, thinking that if he had not saved her, he would not have known the whereabouts of those guys. Was this the arrangement of fate? Through Azra's narration, Su Lu found out that Xiong Lin Quan had killed the 2 Federation officers who had raped her. This was within his expectations. Group 7 had done a lot of dirty work for the government back then, but that didn't mean that they didn't have a bottom line and taste. He knew what kind of people his former subordinates were. Federation soldiers like Xiong Lin Quan, women and children were basically not killed, but Empire men were killed casually, especially soldiers. The rule of strictly killing prisoners was not in line with Group 7's violent aesthetics. Paul was still in extreme danger, and Su Lu knew that he had to find them as soon as possible. He pulled out the night military map and found the location where Xiong Lin Quan and others last appeared 3 days ago. Then he narrowed his eyes and looked at Foray City in the night, stretching out his right index finger and pointing into the distance. His finger pointed at the ruined city, moving slowly along with the artillery fire that lit up from time to time between the buildings on the street corners. Su Li's pair of knife-like, thick eyebrows were deeply furrowed, his mind turning quickly, thinking hard about where that ghost-like Federation team had gone. Countless battle scenes flashed through his mind quickly. He recalled the details of every battle and mission of Group 7 in the 5460 glaciers, in the 3320 rocky peaks, in the streams, and in the streets of the city. He recalled the content of the notes that the old team members took seriously during Magnolia's tactics class. Sulu gradually made some vague judgments in his heart, so he gently lifted the hair in front of his forehead like a certain someone, revealing a gentle smile. In the darkest hours of the morning, Sulu left the temporary camp in the bushes with the young girl Azala, taking advantage of the safest time to quickly move forward along the northeast edge of Foray City. He carried a heavy military bag on his shoulder and held a modified gun that neither the Empire nor the Federal forces had. He jumped between the sycamore trees with the young girl, passing by the black stains of old blood, encountering the Federation's reconnaissance team in the morning, and saw a few cold Empire mechs in the twilight. The gun in Su Li's hand never fired. He strictly followed the rules of the military tactical manual, avoiding those dangers in a thrilling and seemingly simple way. Even though he was carrying a delicate young girl, he still did not have any loopholes. In the second night, he and Azala entered Foray City's second theater to rest for a while. Then they found that the theater was densely packed with the corpses of Empire civilians. The corpses had long rotted and deformed, most of them revealing the eerie white bones piled up randomly, proving that this massacre had been going on for a long time. Because the war was too tragic, it seemed that the Empire did not care about the dignity of these people after they died. Standing beside the frightened and bewildered Azala, Sulu was stimulated by a certain smell in the theater. He narrowed his eyes, thinking of the mass grave he saw on the glacier years ago. That was the blood evidence of the Empire's army slaughtering the Westwood civilians. Then what did this bleak scene prove? That year, when the officer named Arthur refused to carry out the massacre and was shot to death, did any of the Federal forces who opened fire in the theater stand up for him? Looking at the rotting corpses, Sulu was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head and left the theater with the young girl Azala. After successfully escaping the crossroads where the battle was most intense, Sulu brought the young girl Azala to an Imperial military camp. After his identity was confirmed, he was greeted with fear and trepidation by the highest commander of the camp. So he did not hesitate to ask the commander to settle this poor girl down. Before leaving, the young girl Azala lifted the hem of her dress, which had turned gray, and bowed to him. Then she said in a very serious tone, "I know what is wrong. War is wrong. But war is just a noun. It does not know what is right or wrong," Sulu replied after thinking for a while. "Only people know." After saying this, he didn't linger and left the military camp, heading towards the city again. The people he was looking for should still be in the city. The mixed NTR team, led by Xiong Linquan, was like a real ghost, appearing and disappearing amidst the smoke, gunfire, and ruins. Many of the Empire's troops sensed their existence, but they could not find their specific location. The Federal military also did not have a grasp of their whereabouts. Just because others could not find them did not mean that Sulu could not find them. The route he took to escape with the young girl Azala did not deviate from his tracking plan. That afternoon, he arrived outside a courtyard in the countryside southeast of Foray City. Lead clouds still hung overhead, but the density was much less than in the center of the city. The Federation and the Empire's close-range fighter jets were engaged in a desperate battle in the sky. From time to time, there would be fighter jets dragging long fiery tails as they plummeted to the ground at high speed and exploded violently. The degree of radio interference here was much lower, but the long-range equipment Sulu used to communicate with Philip had been damaged in the past few days of concealment and tracking. It was very difficult to pinpoint his location. Sulu looked at the small courtyard dozens of meters away. He walked to the side of a broken tree and squatted down. He looked at the fresh soil and smiled slightly. He dug up with his military knife and found some waste-like nutrition bars and a few rolls of bloodstained bandages. When Group 7 carried out their mission, they would choose to bury the waste produced in the previous 24 hours in a secluded area outside the camp every time they arrived at a temporary camp. This was to prevent the enemy from using the garbage left in the room to determine their direction. Every unit had their own special combat style and even tactical details. Group 7's details were not in their tactical manual, but in the minds of every member. No one knew. However, this definitely did not include Sulu. Along the way, he had constantly used similar methods to confirm the location of Xiong Linquan and the others. Xiong Linquan and the others would never have thought that the details they used to conceal their tracks would instead become a beacon that exposed their movements. The southwest war zone, which had not rained for a long time, suddenly began to drizzle. Sulu, who had completely hidden his body behind the broken tree, narrowed his eyes and glanced at the sky. He casually lifted the rain hat behind him and covered his head. Then, he carefully extended his lens and observed the activity in the small courtyard. There should be someone in the triangular attic. The window was covered in a thick layer of dust, but the broken hole next to it had a somewhat fresh smell. Was it a peephole or a crosshair? Why was there a thin alloy wire in the cabbage nursery? Was it a booby trap or something? Also, there was the treehouse on the broadleaf tree to the west of the small courtyard. The war had lasted for 3 years. Could it be that there were still Imperial children who dared to climb up to play? Why were there military boot marks on the bark of that tree? The NTR team, led by Xiong Linquan, had made extremely thorough security preparations for this small courtyard. However, for Su Lu, these preparations hidden in the dark were too easy to discover. They were too familiar, so familiar that he actually felt a bit moved. As if he had returned to the scene of the tactical drill back in the camp, Su Lu licked his slightly dry lips. Following the path he judged to be the safest, he quietly approached the small courtyard. His right hand slowly extended over the courtyard wall. However, just as he was about to quietly sneak in, a gunshot rang out in the small courtyard. Even with a silencer, in this quiet space, it was still extremely clear and crisp. The bullet brushed past his right hand and entered the brick wall, splashing up a few pieces of sharp red dust. Su Lu suddenly crouched down against the wall and thought in annoyance. There's actually another hidden and strange point. When did these guys become so crafty? The raindrops gradually became heavier, hitting his clothes, the red brick wall, and the wild leaves growing in the nursery and the courtyard with pitter-patter sounds. After that gunshot, there was no more movement in the small courtyard. Su Lu hugged his gun and leaned against the wet brick wall. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the mist between heaven and earth, but he didn't say anything. Sneaking in had already become an extravagant hope, and he definitely wouldn't shoot inside. Due to some very complicated psychological factors, he also didn't want the people inside to know who he was. So, what else could he do other than wait in the rain? Chapter 897. The cold wind and rain wrapped the smoke particles in the atmosphere. The scars of war fell from the sky and washed the surroundings, but they could not wash away the tension and the dead silence inside and outside the small courtyard. No one spoke in the rain, and the silence lasted for a long time. Suddenly, someone in the courtyard shouted, "Listen up, the people outside. I'm about to come out and give you a second." Who else but Xiong Linquan could scold with such vulgar and heroic spirit in the obviously shaky Empire language, especially with the extremely accurate pronunciation of the word? However, Su Lu did not have the urge to laugh. Instead, his expression turned solemn and his brows furrowed deeply. As the former commander of Group 7, he knew the fighting style of his team members too well. He was sure that they would never choose to fight head-on in the heart of this dangerous war zone. Behind this vulgar scolding, the team must be quietly withdrawing from the small courtyard. This was the most conservative and correct choice, but Paul was still in their hands. Su Lu could watch them slip away and watch the rain get heavier and heavier. He was not sure he could find them again. He leaned against the wet red brick wall and was silent for 2 seconds before shouting into the rain, "It's me." The walls in the room on the second floor of the small courtyard were all removed, and it became an open space. Behind the glass window, facing the rear of the small courtyard, thick beech planks were nailed, enough to withstand a round of bullets. However, the people in the room did not know how many enemies there were outside the courtyard and how strong the enemy's firepower was. Under the muzzle of a Federation soldier, 2 Empire prisoners were struggling to lift a stretcher, preparing to be the first to evacuate. 6 lightly wounded people were organizing their equipment. The four people led by Xiong Linquan were holding heavy firearms and vigilantly staring at a certain part of the red courtyard wall, the place where the hand had just grabbed. At this moment, they heard the person outside the courtyard shout 2 words. Those 2 words clearly penetrated the sound of the wind and rain and entered their ears. No one would announce themselves like this. Is it me? Who am I? Who the fuck are you? What is your name? Where did you come from? Where are you going? These were not philosophical questions, but practical questions. However, at least 6 people understood these 2 words. To be precise, they recognized that this voice came from the vocal cords of some guy who had been ravaged by 37 brand cigarettes. They were once members of Group 7 of that hero, so they recognized that the other party was that former hero. The room was silent for a few seconds. Yes, boss. One of the team members shouted out in shock. Then, he subconsciously put down his gun and cheerfully stood on his tiptoes. Through the wooden planks, he shouted at the courtyard wall in the rain, "Boss, it's you? I'll have someone turn off the thunder immediately." After saying this, the other team member very naturally prepared to turn off the electric switch of the explosives. The first team member who spoke first slung the gun over his shoulder and excitedly rushed to the stairs. When this team member walked past Xiong Linquan slapped the back of his head and roared, "Are you an idiot?" This roar and this slap woke up those excited members who were preparing to rendezvous with Su Lo. Only then did they remember that their boss was an Empire citizen. After being separated for 3 years, the reunion in the rainy courtyard had been too sudden, so the members had completely forgotten about this matter. They had been blinded by excitement and joy, and now that they had woken up, their expressions became extremely complicated. They looked at each other's faces, not knowing what to do next. Fuck, how could I forget that he's an Empire citizen? Fuck me too. You forgot that boss is also the Empire's crown prince. Fuck me too. I was just thinking about boss coming back. How could I remember these stupid things? Fuck me too. I was thinking that with boss here, we could escape no matter what. I was so surprised that I fainted. Xiong Linquan coldly looked at the team members, his cold gaze forcing them to shut up. Only then did he fiercely wipe his palms on the side of his pants, silently cursing the word fuck, hiding the embarrassment on his face. In fact, when he heard the word fuck coming from outside the courtyard wall, his first reaction was to rush out and see if that guy had lost an arm or a leg, and if that pair of eyes were still so small. Was he alive? Apart from the 2 Empire prisoners, the rest of the people in the room guessed the identity of the person outside the courtyard wall from their reactions. The NTR team soldiers looked at each other in dismay, shocked that they would actually encounter such a legendary figure. On the stretcher, Dongfang Yu looked at Xiong Linquan and mocked, "Black blind, what the hell are you standing there for? If you want to surrender to the Empire's royal family, this is the best opportunity." Xiong Linquan looked down at the heavy gun in his hand, his tanned face flushed red. He cursed a few words in a low voice, walked to the window, and smashed open the hard beech planks with his fist, aiming at the red brick wall. Su Li's voice came from the red brick wall again. "I'm here to save a person. His name is Paul. He should be one of the 2 Empire soldiers you captured." Xiong Linquan frowned, looked back at the 2 Empire prisoners in the room, and asked in a deep voice, "Which one of you is called Paul?" The bright-eyed Empire prisoner, who had been particularly bold along the way, raised his hand. He was Aunt Susan's only son, Paul. After being captured for nearly 2 months, Paul had long been prepared to die at any time. The reason why he had been following this Federation team and not choosing more risky actions was that he needed an opportunity to die together with them. However, the Federal forces were too strong, and he had never found such an opportunity. Paul was somewhat baffled by the change in the situation at this time. He remembered that day in the cellar. These Federation soldiers had said that their leader was an Empire person. Then, could it be that the person hiding outside the red brick wall was that Empire person? Why did that voice sound familiar? His eyes lit up, but he didn't dare to believe his own judgment. Xiong Linquan stared at the red brick wall in the rain through the window, his heart full of anger. The source of his anger might be because Su Lu suddenly became an Empire person, which made him unable to accept emotionally. Perhaps it was because this person had made Group 7, or even the entire 17 years, suffer too many strange gazes and suspicions in the past 3 years. Perhaps it was because he felt powerless in the face of fate's betrayal. But the more likely reason should be that the leader, who he hadn't seen for 3 years, suddenly appeared on the battlefield. He actually didn't come to find these old men of Group 7, but to save that Empire person named Paul. Of course, he definitely wouldn't admit this. Just as he once said to the battalion commander of the Iron 7th Division's Defense Battalion, he firmly believed that he would be the first to shoot after seeing Su Lu on the battlefield. So Xiong Lin Quan furiously pulled the trigger at the red brick wall. The red brick wall shattered into pieces, exploding into dark powder that splashed everywhere in the rain. Amidst the concentrated gunfire, he shouted wildly, "Fuck your great-grandmother!" The moment the gunshot rang out, Su Lu did a standard roll in the rain. He shrunk his body in an extremely sorry state, lying in the dirty mud. He watched as the red brick area to the left of where he was before instantly turned into ruins under Xiong Linquan's gun. After escaping from the Federation for 3 whole years, he missed his homeland for 3 whole years, especially the old friends who lived there. He had imagined countless times what it would be like if he returned to the Federation in the future and reunited with those fellows. He even imagined that this kind of reunion would happen on the battlefield, just like today. However, in all of his countless imaginings, Su Lun never thought that they, especially Big Bear, would actually really shoot at him. The cold raindrops hit his face and flowed along his black hair, but it didn't make his heart cold. Instead, some kind of wildfire began to burn there, so hot that he bounced up from the wetland like a bolt of lightning, leaving the red brick wall and walking into the rain. The rain was open and there was no shelter. As long as a bullet was fired from the courtyard, his life would easily end. However, the wildfire burning in his chest and abdomen made him not think about this at all. He stood in the wind and rain, fiercely lifted his rain hat, and with one hand holding the heavy homemade gun, he pointed at the small building in the courtyard and cursed furiously. "Fuck your great-grandmother! You opened fire! You opened fire! You might as well fucking kill me." There was no gunshot. Xiong Linquan, who was next to the window, stared at the guy who was in a rage in the rain as if he was looking at a ghost. His index finger was firmly on the trigger, and he didn't dare to move at all. He was shocked to think that after not seeing each other for 3 years, the boss was still so fucking gutsy when he went crazy. Su Li's figure appeared on the monitoring screen in the room. Paul looked at the furious face, washed by the rain in shock. He didn't know where the courage came from, but he shouted loudly outside the window, "Brother, go quickly. Don't worry about me." Xiong Linquan looked back in shock and glanced at the inconspicuous captive of the Empire. Then he turned back to the window and shouted at Su Lu, who was still holding the gun and cursing. "So I caught the Prince of the Empire. Do you think it's possible to let him go?" Paul was stunned. When did he become the Prince of the Empire? Xiong Linquan shot at him. Su Lu kept repeating this sentence in his mind at this time. His anger couldn't be eliminated. Instead, it became more and more explosive. He fiercely wiped the cold rain on his face and directly rushed to the small courtyard, cursing upstairs, "If you have fucking guts, try to shoot me a few more times." He didn't choose any surprise attack method, nor did he raise his gun to try to suppress them. Just like this, with the wind and rain all over his body, he pushed open the front door of the small courtyard with a heavy gun and walked in openly. It was as if he was still the leader of Group 7 in the past. From the front door of the small courtyard to the building, who knew how many bombs and traps were set up? Su Lu didn't even look at them and just shouted, "Turn them all off." The members of Group 7 in the room woke up and turned off all the devices as fast as they could. They seemed particularly flustered and panicked. Xiong Linquan, who was next to the window, held the gun and aimed downstairs again and again. In the end, he cursed and put down the gun dejectedly. The reunion of Group 7 and Su Lu at that time was so absurd. It was so fucking comedic. Chapter 898. A completely drenched Su Lu pushed open the door and walked in, rainwater dripping down his sleeves. The gazes of several members of Team 7 followed the water droplets to the ground. Subconsciously, or perhaps deliberately, they did not look at his face. Because of their nervousness, or perhaps because they did not know how to face him, they did not dare to raise their eyes. The atmosphere in the room was very strange. There was some nervousness, but it was not the nervousness of a life and death battle. There was some suffocation, but it was not the suffocation of firebomb. Instead, it was the suffocation of a naked man on a sunny island rushing down a cliff to see who was faster. Sulu wiped the rainwater off his face. Looking at the people in the room, he paused for a moment. He put his right hand into his shirt pocket, as if he wanted to take something out. The members of NTR in the room suddenly became nervous. Their feelings were completely different from those of Team 7. To them, the man who had broken into the small courtyard through the wind and rain was a legendary figure, an extremely dangerous figure. More importantly, the other party was a person of the Empire. They subconsciously tightened their grip on the guns in their hands, ready to raise their aim and shoot at any moment. Seeing this scene, the members of Team 7 reacted purely subconsciously. They quickly moved the muzzles of their guns, aiming at the floor in front of their feet to suppress him. "Don't be nervous." Sula noticed the situation in the room. He directly threw the gun in his hand to the ground. When he took out his hand from his shirt pocket, there was an extra wet cigarette case. Brother Chua, Zhuzi, Mountain Pao. He looked at the few familiar subordinates and called out their names with an uncontrollable emotion. Then, he took out the dry cigarettes from the cigarette case and handed them out one by one. He did not even miss out on those NTR members who were nervously holding their guns. Those Federation soldiers who did not have Team 7 background felt their scalps go numb when they saw the cigarettes in front of them. They did not know what to do. After a moment of awkwardness, they hesitantly took the cigarettes. However, not a single one of them dared to light it. They still carefully held their guns with both hands, vigilantly, or perhaps perplexedly looking at the situation in the room. The members of Old Seven's group didn't have any misgivings. Mountain Pao took the cigarette with a chuckle and flipped it over. His already thick bangs were now even thicker because of the dirt on his forehead. After he lit it up, he took a deep puff. However, he was choked by the spicy smoke after it got wet and started coughing. He quickly took out a blue pack of cigarettes from his trouser pocket. Holding a cigarette with both hands, he said sympathetically, "Boss, smoke this. It's a blue box 37. You haven't smoked in a long time, right?" Sulu was startled. He took the 37 brand cigarette that he hadn't smoked for a long time. Looking at the swaying thick black hair in front of him, he thought of the young master who had forced this smoking habit into the 7th group. He also thought of the past of more than 100 men on the battlefield many years ago. Just like Brother Sao and Bede, Sean Pao was also one of the new members of Unit 8384 who joined Group 7. His father was a famous lawyer, and his family was extremely well off. Sulu still remembered that after a certain devilish training, this kid hid in the grass and cried. Like a wrong boy, he complained that the conditions in the military camp were too bad. Even his cigarettes could only be smoked cheap goods like the blue box 37. He lit the cigarette, narrowed his eyes, and took a deep breath. With a self-deprecating and nostalgic sigh, he said, "It's been many years since someone called me boss." Hearing this, the expressions of the members became somewhat complicated. They once again thought of the identity of the man in front of them. They thought of the revelation of their identities that shocked the entire Federation. They suddenly realized that there were some problems with their behavior. They didn't have the attitude that soldiers of the Federation should have. But this really couldn't be helped. Mountain Pao frowned. He was sure that he couldn't treat the boss as an enemy. Thus, he looked at the people in the room and chuckled. He lit the military fire lighter in his hand and smiled as he moved in front of the NTR members to light their cigarettes for them. A dozen men lit their cigarettes and stood in place, sucking hard. The swirling smoke quickly spread out, occupying every corner of the room, successfully dispersing the previous tension, strangeness, and confrontation. On a dangerous battlefield where life and death were imminent, This kind of burning stick was always the best material to close the distance and harmonize emotions. The NTR members, who were facing a great enemy, finally relaxed. Genuine smiles began to appear on their faces as they leaned against the wall and whispered something to their companions. Outside the window, the wind and rain continued. The pearl-like raindrops hit the broken glass and the wooden planks of the beech tree. The raindrops continued to blossom, and the sound of the raindrops echoed in the ears of the people in the room. It was like a light and lively violin song, making people feel extremely relaxed. Sulu took off the cigarette and held it between his fingers. He quickly scanned the room and saw a wounded person lying on a stretcher in the dark. Paul was behind the stretcher. His still young face was filled with disbelief, surprise, and frustration as he tried to stand up. He gently pressed down with his right hand hanging by his side, indicating for Paul to calm down and not move too much. Then he looked at the burly man by the window and said after a moment of silence, "You know how dangerous this place is. It's even more troublesome to walk with two captives. Don't talk to me about tactical manuals. If you think the wounded are a problem, I can help you." Raindrops drilled in through the smashed beech planks behind Xiong Linquan, drenching his strong shoulders. However, he had no intention of moving to take shelter from the rain. Ever since Su Lu entered the room, he had been standing by the window and looking at him expressionlessly and silently. He didn't hug him, pick up his gun, or pick up the cigarette. "Big Bear, you know me. I won't lie, and I won't talk nonsense. Give me some face and let Paul go. He's not a prince of the Imperium. He and his mother saved me in the Imperium years ago. In other words, they helped the Federation. Although it was not intentional, I assure you that he is a good person. His whole family is good people." Xiong Linquan slightly frowned, thinking that these words sounded weird. When he was about to say something, a burst of exaggerated laughter suddenly came from the dark corner of the room. "What a fucking joy! Ha ha ha!" The laughter was very loud, arrogant, cold, and even filled with resentment. It immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the room. Everybody took off the cigarette in their mouth and looked at that direction in shock. "What are you doing? Acting in a movie? A warm reunion? You idiots. You think that this guy is not a citizen of the Imperium if you cover his eyes?" Dongfang Yu, who was lying on the stretcher, was seriously injured. But at this moment, he somehow found the strength to prop himself up and lean against the damp corner of the wall. Panting heavily, he looked at the crowd and scolded fiercely. "What do you want? Defect to the enemy or commit treason? Or are you planning to suck up to the Imperial Crown Prince?" He raised his arm with difficulty and pointed at Xiong Linquan, who was standing by the window, and shouted, "Xiong Linquan, if you dare to make a deal with him, unless you kill me right now, this daddy will fuck your entire family and 18 generations of ancestors when I get back." Shan Pao was enraged by this person's vicious words. He spat out the cigarette in his mouth and roared, "Dongfang, this daddy doesn't care about your rank. If you dare to call the boss a citizen of the Empire, this daddy will definitely stab you 3 more times in your stomach when you recover." Dongfang Yu's resentful laughter forced tears out of his eyes. The wound on his chest and abdomen split open and began to seep out blood. He looked very miserable. He looked at Shan Pao and said with contempt, "Coward, you think he's not a citizen just because you say so?" Shan Pao's lips moved slightly. He wanted to retort, but didn't know how to. He grimaced and looked back at Sulo. His eyes were like that of a wounded rabbit, extremely pitiful. Sulo looked towards the corner of the room. Only now did he recognize the identity of this seriously injured person. He couldn't help but feel a wave of shock and strong confusion. Dongfang Yu was the commander of the 1st Regiment of the Iron 7th Division many years ago. He was Du Shaoqing's right-hand man along with Shimin Jin. The war had lasted for many years. According to the usual trajectory, this person should be at least the commander of a certain Federation division or even higher command right now. He should have become one of the federal military's new generation generals. Who would have thought that such an officer with a bright future would appear in the most desperate courtyard of the Southwest war zone, lying on a stretcher and coughing blood while letting out mournful and resentful laughter. Su Lu naturally remembered that he was the one who had forced Du Shaoqing to personally punish this person and throw him into the NTR unit of the new 17th Division. However, he didn't expect this person to survive for 3 years in the NTR unit, where the casualty rate was incomparably high. He also didn't expect that Du Shaoqing, who had long been the #1 person on the Federation's front lines, would actually not bail out this most loyal subordinate of his. You're right. Whether I admit it or not, I'm still a citizen of the Empire. However, I've already learned not to treat this identity as a humiliation because not everyone from the Empire is bad, and not everyone from the Federation is good. 3 years ago, several bottles of inferior wine, 2 bowls of instant noodles, and a long conversation in the department store at the foot of the mountain. Sula had long forgotten about his identity. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Dongfang Yu on the stretcher. For example, someone from the Federation like you is actually shameless enough to shoot a comrade in the back on the battlefield. Do you think you have the right to call others cowards? The room was silent. Dongfang Yu leaned against the wall and looked at him, the smile on her face gradually fading. After a moment of silence, she coldly replied, I don't want to explain anything about what happened back then. Even during these years in NTR, I've never hidden my disgust for that piece of shit Team 7. For bandits like you, even if all of you die, I won't show any sympathy. But I paid the price. Dongfang Yu lowered her head and looked at the blood seeping out of the bandage on her abdomen. She said, I've been in NTR for 3 whole years. How long have the other people in this room been in NTR? Who on Mohua planet has killed more enemies than me? According to my military achievements, I could have walked out of NTR with my chest held high a long time ago. However, I'm not leaving. I'm going to stay in NTR until I die. Why? Dongfang Yu stared into his eyes and continued expressionlessly. Sulu, I'm doing this to shut the mouth of a moral peddler like you. I'm going to tell everyone that I didn't disgrace my commander in the Iron 7th Division. I'm going to make it so that you won't have any excuse to criticize my unit. Chapter 899. As for these prisoners, they're my prisoners. Dongfang Yu's pale face peeked out from between the thick stubble of his beard. It was as if he was mocking Su Lu. He looked at the people in the room and mocked. This is not a fucking movie. If this was a movie, I would make you kneel down and beg me. You better not kneel down and beg me, because no matter how you beg, it will be useless. He looked at Su Lu again. Ignoring his injury, he turned his arm and pointed at the 3 terrifying puncture wounds on his chest and abdomen. He said in a serious tone, I used my life to exchange for this. These 2 Empire prisoners must carry me back to the army and then be locked in the prisoner camp for the rest of their lives. If you want to take them away, you will have to shoot a few more holes in my stomach. Xiong Linquan looked at the dust on his military boots and the swaying of the heavy gun beside him. He suddenly shook his head and said to Su Lu, You should go. I have already sent the coordinates to the base. Our mission has been completed long ago. Tomorrow evening, a mecha camp will come and pick us up. If you don't want to face the federal military again, you better leave immediately. The relationship between Su Lu and Team 7 was very complicated. They were naturally on opposite ends of the spectrum, but they couldn't really be enemies. Of course, they couldn't appear too close either. Right now, Xiong Linquan was able to say these words, which already represented a very rare trust and many old friendships. Su Li's reaction surprised everyone in the building. He didn't feel sad or dejected, nor did he suddenly transform into a cold-blooded demon king. Instead, he silently took off the military backpack behind him and frowned as he looked at the light screen in the corner. He asked, Is there a signal in this area? The electronic interference is still very serious. The communication is intermittent. I only had time to report the coordinates, but I didn't record the fake signal. Pearl from Team 7 habitually answered this question quickly. When the words came out of her mouth, she realized that this kind of military information should be kept secret. She couldn't help but awkwardly scratch her forehead. Sula looked at Xiong Linquan and asked with a frown, When were the coordinates sent back? Although they had not seen each other for 3 years, Xiong Linquan could still easily read the emotions hidden between his eyebrows. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. According to military discipline, he absolutely should not reveal this information to anyone, although the other party was once his most trusted and respected leader. After all, the blood of the imperial family flowed in his body. Not to mention that he had disappeared for such a long time. Who could guarantee that there was no change in his body? After a moment of silence, Xiong Linquan overcame the struggle in his heart with the countless scenes of life and death battles he had experienced in the past. In a low voice, he stated a precise time. Before we entered the range of the Southwest Theater of Operations electronic shielding cloud, I did some intelligence filtering calculations and felt that there were some problems. Your team of NTRs has been lurking in Fiji for so long, and the military has been ignoring them. Unfortunately, the frequency of appearing in the information stream during that period of time was too high. Sulu looked at Xiong Linquan and said, I feel a little strange. Originally, I wanted to suggest that you guys make contact with the ground forces first and not directly contact the staff of the base at the rear. But since you've already sent back the coordinates, I can only suggest that you guys evacuate this small courtyard immediately. Why? Xiong Linquan asked with a frown. Feeling. Sulu replied, I don't have any evidence or intelligence details, but I feel a little strange. It's just like the feeling I had on the battlefield before those stupid things happened. Xiong Linquan stared into his eyes and retorted angrily. Are you crazy? We're already very lucky to be able to find this camp to defend and wait for reinforcements. But now you want us to listen to the feelings of an Empire citizen and abandon this place? After a moment of silence, Sulu pulled out the precise map of Immerse planet's surface from his watch. Just like when he was preparing for battle in the past, he directly waved his hand and called for all the members to gather around him. Then, he lowered his head and pointed at a certain valley and plain on the electronic map and said, This is the landing pad closest to the southwest of the Federation's air support area. If the military send a fighter jet here, it will only take 47 minutes. This also means that there are still 16 minutes before the fighter jet will arrive at this small courtyard. Member Pearl frowned as she calculated the distance between the two places. She raised her head to look at Sulu and explained, Only 13 minutes. Right now, the Federation fighter jet engines are using the Nutshell Elite second generation, so their speed is much faster than before. Then he chuckled and added, I heard it's Shangqiu's project. Sulu smiled and ignored his teasing. He looked at Xiong Linquan and said, 13 minutes. We still have plenty of time to retreat to a safe area. Xiong Linquan was stunned for a moment, then frowned at him and asked coldly, Why would the military send a fighter jet? Even if they decided not to send a mecha battalion to support us, they should send a transport plane. What if they send a fighter jet? Sulu stared into his eyes and asked, That doesn't make sense. Xiong Linquan waved his arms angrily and said, Does the base want to attack our team? I know you've always thought that the upper echelons of the Federation are all fucking schemers, and I also admit that those people are fucking schemers. But don't forget that this is the front line. This is planet Immerse. This is not the capital. We are at war. Sulu was about to say something, but Xiong Linquan continued with a frown. Besides, you should know very well that even though the General Staff Department transferred all of us, the old 7 group, to NTR, to those big shots, we are nothing. Even if there is a conspiracy, it is not worth it to use us. In the small courtyard amidst the rain, the people in the room quietly listened to the argument beside the electronic map. At this time, no one knew that within the federal military base, there had been an undercurrent flowing. One careless operation mistake had led to a routine purge becoming an even colder scheme. They also didn't know that Da Vinci was currently on the run in the forest, and that hundreds of small-eyed Special Forces soldiers were currently searching for the location of Camp 2 at the foot of the mountain. At this time, Sulu also didn't know what had happened at the base, and he even agreed with Xiong Linquan's opinion. On the front line where the flames of war raged on endlessly, the big shots of the federal military had no reason to make a move against this NTR team. This kind of thing was too dirty and evil, so dirty and evil that it was not in line with the interests of any faction. However, based on his instinctive sense of danger, based on the importance he attached to the old members of this lone team, he decided to stick to his opinion. He stared into Xiong Linchuan's eyes without backing down and said calmly, "Even if it is just to be safe, you should still take the team and retreat. See if there will be a fighter jet coming. If there isn't, you can come back again." Xiong Linquan was silent, his brows furrowed. Su Li used mockery to strengthen the strength of his words. He sneered and said, "It only takes a few minutes, just a rain shower. What are you worried about? Are you worried that I, a person of the Empire, will guess the ugly actions of the Federation and make you lose face?" Time passed minute by minute, second by second, and Xiong Linquan still couldn't make a decision. He was not an indecisive commander on a battlefield, but Su Li's words were too absurd in his opinion. Why would the base launch an attack on his team? Shan Pao's gaze shifted between Xiong Linquan and Su Lu several times. Finally, he couldn't help but pick up his helmet. Through the battlefield infantry system, he said to the observation post outside the building, "Monkey, don't save energy. Increase the filter detection range. Keep an eye on the sky of the 556 sector in the southwest. Pay attention to any abnormalities." Xiong Linquan tacitly agreed with his actions. Shan Pao looked at Su Lu and explained, "It's Monkey today on the tree hole. I guess it was him a long time ago. His tactical actions are still so crude." Su Lu smiled and said, "Only a blind person wouldn't be able to see those two large footprints on the tree bark." The communication system wasn't turned off. A few seconds later, the angry voice of the member of Group 7 in the middle of the tree sounded. "Boss, you can't talk behind people's backs. Monkey didn't open fire just now." Su Lu smiled, but his brows suddenly furrowed. He subconsciously covered his ear with his left hand. When he confirmed that he could communicate in this area, he had activated the equipment in his military backpack. The equipment, which had been severely damaged, finally connected with the spaceship outside the atmosphere. Hearing the hissing noise and the intermittent keywords in his eardrums, Su Li's expression became more and more serious. He looked at Xiong Linquan and said, "We have to retreat. A fighter jet is approaching at high speed. It's faster than what we calculated. It seems that some people are more thirsty than we thought." Everyone in the room looked at him in shock. Su Lu added, "It's Sparrowhawk." The Sparrowhawk was one of the Federation's most powerful ground attack methods. The Federation soldiers in the room were all veterans who had climbed out of piles of corpses. Of course, they knew that it was impossible for this kind of fighter jet to land in this kind of terrain, let alone evacuate with so many people. Exaggerated laughter burst out in the dark corner again. Dong Fangyu, who had been silent all this time, raised his arm and wiped his tears with difficulty. He scolded everyone. "You actually believe a member of the Empire's royal family. You're all fucking crazy." Monkey's shocked shout suddenly came from the treehouse outside the building. "It's really a Sparrowhawk, a gray hawk." The atmosphere in the room suddenly became tense. Dong Fangyu was stunned for a moment before he shouted angrily, "There are so many fighter jets of the Empire in the sky. This is a fucking air battle. Why are you so nervous?" Xiong Linquan looked back at him coldly and said, "According to the observation pattern of the past 2 days, the air battle in this area has already ended. Those people even dared to blow up the ancient bell." Su Lu said, "Retreat." Xiong Linquan gave the order. "I'm not retreating." Dong Fangyu roared, "I don't believe that anyone will attack me. You bunch of lunatics. Idiots." Su Lu shouted, "What about that time you fucked with old Bai?" Dong Fangyu was silent. Xiong Linquan picked up a corner of the stretcher. Su Lu waved his hand and signaled Paul to follow behind him. He picked up the other corner of the stretcher. Everyone left the small courtyard at the fastest speed and entered the storm. A few minutes later, a gray Federation Sparrowhawk broke through the clouds and arrived. Accompanied by the clear sound of missile launch, the small courtyard turned into a sea of fire. Chapter 900. The gray streamlined Federation fighter jet roared through the airspace above the small courtyard, tearing apart countless raindrops. It completed a graceful somersault high in the sky and flew away at a high speed, like a gray hawk tearing through the clouds. Because it was deep in the intersection area of the Southwest Theater of Operations, the Gray Hawk fighter jet did not return after it left, and there was no routine confirmation of the results. In fact, all 6 ground-to-ground missiles under the wings had hit the small courtyard. What else was there to confirm? The vegetable leaves that were moistened by the raindrops instantly dried up and then turned into ashes. The small building collapsed and was immediately blown into countless whistling pieces of debris. The red brick wall on the periphery was also shaken by the tremendous force of the explosion to the soft mud ground, as soft as a biscuit that had been soaked in water, confirming the terrifying effect of the previous attack. Within the range of hundreds of square meters, probably even the voles underground were all dead. In the dense mountain forest hundreds of meters behind the small courtyard, everyone was crouching behind the wet green hill, staring at the burning ruins of the small courtyard with their eyes wide open. Feeling the hot airflow that was still hot, even though it was so far away, they couldn't help but change their expressions dramatically. They were collectively silent for a long time. Someone broke the suffocating atmosphere at this time and murmured, "Mixed with 2 graphite fiber bundle incendiary bombs. So fucking ruthless." On a stretcher behind the crowd, Dongfang Yu pressed the soil under the mud with her right hand and barely propped up her body. Her eyes became a little hollow, but she still struggled to curse in a low voice. "Don't believe that Empire man. This must be a mistake. Yes, it must be a mistake." Except for Paul and the other captive of the Imperium who exchanged a mocking smile, none of the soldiers of the Federation who were still in shock paid any attention to Dongfang Yu, nor were they in the mood to argue with him. Facts spoke louder than words, and cold facts spoke louder than any trust. Sulu took off the leaf on his face and frowned slightly. He found that the equipment in the military backpack did not respond, which meant that the connection with the spaceship outside the atmosphere was cut off again. Xiong Lin Quan stared silently at the flames that were still sticking out their tongues ferociously in the heavy rain. He said to Zhu, who was lying beside him, "Check the signal strength. If the continuous duration exceeds the predetermined value, then reconnect with the previous communication channel. Tell the base that we've been attacked by a Federation Greyhawk fighter. Ask them what happened." Pearl looked at him in surprise and found that Xiong Lin Quan was not speaking out of anger. She subconsciously looked at Su Lu and found that the boss had remained silent. She could not help but rub her head of curly hair in annoyance. Following his instructions, she began to search for a signal channel through the filtering equipment. Xiong Lin Quan explained to his team members with an expressionless face. At the same time, he explained to Su Lu, "That's our own team. We need to make a final confirmation." "Yes, but..." Zhu took off her earphones. With a hint of grief and indignation, she looked at Xiong Lin Quan and Su Lu and said, "There is no reply. The frequency of the base has entered a state of silence." The base's communication channel, which should be responsible for receiving or rescuing them, had entered a strange state of silence at this moment. Everyone in the forest and behind the green hills knew what this meant. As if infected by the silence of the communication channel, the people lying on the ground in the rain also fell into a deathly silence. Dongfang Yu also slowly closed her mouth. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the movement in the field in the rain. He climbed up from the wet ground and took 3 deep breaths. His brows were tightly knitted together as he muttered, "Fuck you fucking mutter." The former member of Group 7, Monkey, had been in charge of the lookout post in the treehouse. He was the last to leave the small courtyard. While he was shocked by the fighter, he had been paying attention to Su Lu. When he heard these words, he explained to the soldier beside him in a low voice, "Boss usually doesn't like to swear, but sometimes he can't help it. That's why he likes to use this kind of automatic silencer." The meaning of this sentence is, "Fuck your fucking mother." The soldier who had just joined NTR half a year ago said in astonishment, "That's really dirty. That's why it has to be silenced, right?" Speaking of which, our Group 7 also used to have this kind of habit. In the past 2 years, no one has used it, but isn't Boss back now? I reckon he'll have to pick it up again. I see that you're usually quite honest and dutiful. In the future, you'll have to pay more attention in this area so that you don't fall behind." The group's 7-member, nicknamed Monkey, was called Jean Ruse. He came from Linhai. His parents were both powerful people in a university city. His family had a long history of learning. However, after mixing with Group 7 on the front lines for so many years, he had long become a boorish man with a mouth full of vulgarities. Just like Jean Ruse, the old members of Group 7, like Pearl and Mountain Pow, were angry and sad that the federal military had not only abandoned them, but also wanted to kill them. However, they were not nervous and they were not in despair. Group 7's tradition had always been to allow anger, but not despair. Moreover, now that they had welcomed their boss back, they dared to charge forward no matter how stormy the road ahead was. Just as Jean Ruse was translating his boss's vulgarities to the newcomer, Xiong Linquan stood up with his heavy gun and said in a deep voice, "Cut off all communication channels and take off your friend or foe identification devices." Everyone took off the metal buckles on their belts without hesitation and simply destroyed them. Dong Fangyu, who was on the stretcher, was silent for a moment. Then, with trembling hands, she took out the identification device from between the layers of the stretcher and threw it out. A hard military boot ruthlessly crushed the metal plate that represented the identity of a Federation soldier. Xiong Linquan slowly retracted his right foot, allowing the rain to hit his expressionless face. He looked at everyone and said in a deep voice, "From now on, we will be a true lone army. We won't have a base. We won't have a backline. We will fight alone in a foreign land. Everyone will be our enemy. We won't have any more missions. Our only mission is to survive. We have to survive and return to the base alive. No, we have to return to the Federation alive. We have to expose this ridiculous matter. We have to stab those big shots who ordered the fighter jets to bomb us until they bleed. Then we'll rip off their balls. This is my order." The soldiers in the rain stood upright. Whether it was the members of the first 7 groups or the veterans of NTR, they were expressionless, silent, and determined. There was no hot-blooded oath, but they were full of strong willpower. Even Paul and the other Imperial captive could feel some kind of heat in the wind and rain. Sulu leaned against a green tree and looked at Xiong Linquan's burly figure in the rain. He couldn't help but show a trace of emotion. The reckless and combative subordinate had now grown into an excellent commander. However, he had to interrupt the other party's beautiful battle mobilization and said, "The Federation's follow-up reaction won't be so fast. The second wave of attacks shouldn't come soon, but I think the previous explosion was not small. There should be Imperial troops coming to see. So let's go." Xiong Linquan looked back at him. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "Boss, where are we going?" Finally hearing the long-lost title from his mouth, Sulu was dazed for a moment. He scratched his wet hair with a smile and replied softly, "If you're not afraid of being sold by us, then I suggest you go to the place with the most people in the Empire first." The soldiers in the rain all laughed in the evening. The lone army made of 6 lightly wounded soldiers, 1 heavily wounded soldier on a stretcher, 5 healthy soldiers of the Federation, 2 captives of the Imperium, and a certain prince of the Imperium reached a forsaken graphite mine under the cover of the dusk and the rain. Sulu was very familiar with this abandoned mine pit and was very good at using this terrain to fight. After a brief discussion, the team chose this place as a temporary camp for the night. An observation post was arranged in the valley behind the side. Sulu carried the modified gun and vigilantly patrolled around. After confirming that the camp was temporarily safe, he relaxed a little and returned to the dark tunnel. He finally had a chance to talk to Paul. The joy of reuniting after a long time and Paul's doubts and shock about his identity did not need to be described too much. Sulu did not tell him the bad news that Aunt Susan was seriously ill. He just smiled and comforted the young man. He would definitely let him leave this terrifying planet alive. Paul was a little weak after being held captive for 2 months. He gradually fell asleep in excitement, nervousness, and confusion. Sulu quietly looked at his still young face, zipped up his sleeping bag, and walked out. It had been raining for a whole day, but the clouds in the sky were still as heavy as lead clouds. Countless electron turbulences were rolling and struggling in those clouds. The bright full moon on the horizon only appeared for a very short time before it was swallowed up in an instant. The mine was plunged into darkness. In the darkness, Xiong Linquan came over, took out a cigarette, and tore it in half. He handed one half to Su Lu and stuffed the other half into his mouth. He began to chew it with his saliva. I'm not as addicted to smoking as before. It's probably because I haven't been on the battlefield for a long time. Su Lu gently rubbed the tobacco with his fingers and said with a smile, I don't know if Old Bai has succeeded in quitting smoking. His child should be almost 3 years old. I heard it's a girl, Xiong Linquan said. A girl is good. Someone as delicate as him will definitely be popular when they grow up. Su Lu paused slightly and suddenly asked, How many people do we have left? Xiong Linquan was silent for a long time before replying, 37. Su Lu looked at the occasional cannon fire under the night sky in the distance and said with a frown, Back then, there were 5,460 of us. We had a total of 137 people, and now there's only a few left? I'm talking about the people who are still in the army. Boss, after you ran away, some people chose to retire like Old Bai. Lu Jiao retired 2 years ago, and now he's driving a taxi in the capital. He earns quite a good income, but I heard that he always has abdominal cramps on rainy days, and he can't even hold the steering wheel properly. Do you still remember the wound on his stomach back then? In his letters, he always complained that it was the after effects of that injury. I don't understand. There's no joint in the stomach, so how can he get rheumatism? Fuck. Xiong Linquan scolded with a smile and spat out the tobacco in his mouth. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and sighed. Retiring from the army is pretty good. At least they're still alive. Xiong Linquan only said that some people had retired from the army, but he was not willing to say how many. He understood what he meant. Many of those people in Group 7 had left the army forever because of this war. He stuffed the tobacco into his mouth and slowly chewed. He felt that it was getting more and more bitter and numb. Chapter 901. Death was the eternal main theme of war. The screams of being shot and the cries of discovering one's disability were just background noises. As for words like sacrifice and dedication, they were just unremarkable side notes. Through Xiong Linquan's narration, Su Lu learned about those who had left in the past few years of war. What was even more chilling was that, in this bloody battle in the southwest mines of the 20 or so former Team 7 members of the 17th Division's NTR unit, less than 10 people were still alive. Why were you guys transferred to NTR? Su Lu spat out the wet tobacco in his mouth and asked with a frown, You've already been promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. At least this means that you haven't violated military discipline in the past 3 years. You said that Old Gu abandoned himself and went to the cookhouse, so there's even less reason to send him to the suicide squad. It was a temporary order from the general staff before the war. For some reason, the higher-ups suddenly remembered us old Team 7 members. With a single order, they sent everyone to NTR. He brought Hua Xiaoxi to the base to cause trouble once, but it didn't have any effect. We all knew that there was definitely something wrong with this matter. Thinking about the gray hawk fighter in the rainy sky during the day, Xiong Linquan's expression was very ugly. He continued in a low voice, but we never would have thought that just this alone wasn't enough. They actually wanted to kill us directly. There must have been a problem somewhere. Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked over at the abandoned mines, at the cranes that were faintly discernible against the background of weak artillery fire. His voice was slightly cold as he said, But no matter what the problem was, the federal military transferred you guys to NTR. This matter is unforgivable. If this is the intention of the highest level of the military, then they don't need our forgiveness at all, because no one can do anything to them, including you, boss. Right now, you're a citizen of the Empire, not a hero of the Federation. You're not the successor personally chosen by the war god, the destined commander of the 17th Division. Xiong Linquan looked at Su Lu in silence for a moment before calmly changing the topic. As per your request, I pacified that Imperial captive and promised to let him go once he entered the safe zone. After a slight pause, he said self-deprecatingly, "But my Imperial language is terrible, and I don't know if he understands. Besides, I remember who Paul is. You mentioned him twice after you came back from the Empire last time. Maybe he and that Imperial Anne are really good people, but when I think about how that guy might have killed his comrades on the battlefield, I feel very uncomfortable." Xiong Lin Chuan's sentiments about the upper echelons of the federal military and the changes in the camp ended there. He began to seriously report to Su Lu the intelligence the troops were currently facing and discuss what they should do next. This was a real soldier. No matter what kind of unexpected situation they encountered on the battlefield, even if it was the ugliest, dirtiest, disgusting, and shameless thing, they could accept reality as quickly as possible, get used to it, and then resist it until they finally defeated it. According to the current route, we will be able to reach the outermost edge of the Southwest Theater of Operations in a dozen hours. There is no protection from the lead clouds and high-density electron turbulence. The signal relay stations outside the atmosphere, as well as the military satellites of the Federation, can easily capture our whereabouts and then complete a fatal positioning attack. This is my biggest worry right now. Su Lu frowned and was silent for a moment before saying, "Staying in the Southwest Theater of Operations means that we may encounter troops far stronger than us at any time and anywhere. It is equally dangerous. Let's go out first. If the glory of the Charter sprinkles down, I'll find a way to deal with it." In the minds of the people of the Federation, no one could resist the glory of the Charter, even in the Imperium, where the glory was dim and incomplete. But after hearing Su Li's words, Xiong Linquan did not show any emotional reaction of shock. After the storm, the brawny man accepted the return of the boss from the bottom of his heart. Then he naturally returned to the mindset of the past and firmly believed that the boss was omnipotent. A cigarette was lit in the abandoned graphite pit, vaguely emitting a faint red light. Frowning, Xiong Linquan lifted the dark curtain and looked forward. Surprisingly, he did not scold him in a low voice. On the contrary, his left hand that lifted the curtain was somewhat stiff. Su Lu glanced into the pit through the gap. In that extremely short instant when the light of the fire illuminated the walls of the pit, he saw Dong Fangyu on the stretcher. The cigarette in his mouth was slowly burning, and the middle-aged officer's white hair was tangled together, revealing his severely damaged ear. Abandoned, deceived, and hunted down, we of the 7th Division have seen too much of the dark side of the Federation in the past, so we can be a little calmer. But Dong Fangyu is different. He has been following Du Shaoqing ever since he left the military academy, and his whole mind is filled with loyalty. Right now, he should be in a very bad mood. Xiong Linquan lowered the heavy curtain and said to Su Lu in a low voice, "You should still remember that his ear was cut off by Old Bai with a knife. Now that he's disabled, he can't really listen to human speech. Also, he spent 3 whole years in the Abyss Division like NTR, so it's inevitable that his mentality is somewhat distorted. Don't mind his attitude during the day. I didn't think that you would speak up for Dongfang. You know that I've never had a good impression of those maniacs from the Iron 7 Division." Su Lu frowned, looked at Xiong Linquan, and said in a low voice, "His ear was cut off by Old Bai, so it's only right that he pay the price. I won't forget what he did on planet Yellow Doom, just because of this. Our 7 Division only has a pair of twin brothers. GSC died by that stupid stream in 20 years ago. Yeah, one can be said to have died by this guy's hands." Xiong Linquan was silent for a very long time. He stroked the light spikes on his head and said, "If you want to survive in this damn place on the front lines and live with a normal mind, you have to forget too many scenes of death. This time, so many of our brothers died in the Southwest War Zone, but Monkey and the others can still smile so happily when they see you. That's why." He looked at Su Lu and said, "I'm not trying to defend Dongfang or anything. I just feel that this guy has been living quite a miserable life. We've only been in NTR for less than 3 months, and we're already on the verge of going crazy. He's been here for 3 whole years." Su Lu gently moved his right foot and slowly stepped on a rock. After a moment of silence, he said, "That's true. People have to look forward." At 3:30 in the morning, before leaving the abandoned graphite mine camp, this lonely Federation team held a pre-battle meeting. Everyone was clear about the dangerous situation they were in, so the main purpose of this meeting was not to unify their thoughts or mobilize them, but to simply come up with a conclusion where everyone should go. The upper echelons of the federal military wanted to eliminate them for certain reasons. So now there was a sad and indignant truth. The areas where the Empire's troops held the advantage were actually safer for these Federation soldiers. However, they could not wander around the Empire's controlled areas forever. Apart from facing the test of raising ammunition, they could also be surrounded and annihilated by the Empire's troops at any time. The image of a lone army fighting is very tragic and powerful, but this kind of thing will always have a tragic ending. It's better to avoid it if possible. Sulu put down the canned food in his hand and passed it to Mountain Pal beside him. He looked at the people in the tunnel and said with a smile, "I suggest that we go around the Liangshan area, shake off the pursuit of the upper echelons of the military, and actively and quickly approach the ground troops of the Federation. There's no conspiracy that can make the millions of federal troops of Mo Hua move together. As long as we don't get killed on the spot, then we'll have a chance to explain the truth. The key is which ground troops are trustworthy. If we just go over like this and find out that the ground troops are Hu Lian's direct subordinates and are chasing us everywhere, then it'll be like sending white meat to an orphan's mouth. It'll be a horrible death." The people in the tunnel used the dim light to stare at the electronic military map and began to seriously consider the direction of their breakout. They had been hiding in Fear City for 2 months, and they had no information at all, so they did not know what to do. The war in the southwest has started, and the 11th Division has moved to the North Liangshan area. According to the calculations made in the past 2 months, this division is now stationed here. A cold and tired voice suddenly rang out in the quiet tunnel. On the stretcher in the corner, Dongfang Yu struggled to prop up half of her body. Expressionlessly, she pointed at a corner of the map and said, "We should approach there immediately." "Why?" someone asked. "The 11th Division and the 3rd Division are the main forces of the Southwest War Zone, and they're the direct subordinates of the division. Even if Hu Lian can order them around, he definitely won't dare to order these 2 divisions to kill us. Besides, I used to have a good relationship with those 2 division commanders." Dongfang Yu coldly explained, "The 3RD Division's main attack range is in the Northwest Basin, too far from here, so we can only choose to approach the 11th Division." Mountain Pal looked at him and sneered. "Wake up. Even if you used to be friends with those 2 division commanders, when was that? Now, they're the division commanders of the Federation's main forces, and you're just a pitiful guy like us who's counting the days in the NTR unit. Who would remember you?" Dongfang Yu's haggard cheeks suddenly flushed red. He stared coldly at Mountain Pal, wanting to scold him, but for some reason, he just shut his mouth and refused to speak again. "I agree with Dongfang's opinion. Use the fastest speed to approach the 11th Division." Right at this moment, out of everyone's expectations, Su Lu expressed his agreement. He looked at Dongfang Yu and said, "I don't think highly of your relationship with the 11th Division commanders, but I believe that the troops and officers brought by Du Shaoqing won't all be as fucked up as you were in the past." Dongfang Yu frowned slightly and looked at him. It was rare that he did not retort. Mount Pingliang was not that dangerous, but because all the roads had long been destroyed in the war, and because of the sudden appearance of a great fog, it immediately became exceptionally rugged and difficult to traverse. However, this was definitely a good thing for them. Under the cover of the thick fog, the team quietly passed through the 2 remaining lines of the Empire's firepower blockade. By nightfall, they arrived outside a hidden valley at the northern foot of Mount Pingliang with great difficulty. Xiong Linquan slowly lowered the binoculars in his hand and looked at the fog in the valley. He could not hide the disappointment on his face and said self-deprecatingly, "Where did those guys run off to?" Could it be that they were swallowed up by this strange fog? They had come to the simulated 11th Division's garrison area with hope, but who knew how many days ago Du Shaoqing's direct troops had already left the northern foot of Mount Pingliang. Now, they had no idea where they had gone. Su Lu led a few team members into the valley to search for possible remnants of the 11th Division supplies. However, when they returned, other than a broken communication station, they did not even manage to pick up 2 standard federal military caliber bullets. They temporarily rested in a dark and gloomy cave. The team members were so disappointed and tired that they did not have the energy to talk. Only Xiong Linquan and Dongfang noticed that Su Lu was hugging the broken communication station and fiddling with something at the entrance of the cave. The electronic shield pseudo-overflow code can still be used for half an hour. The self-starting chip will release fragments of the 11th Division's information. We don't have to worry about the base discovering our existence. This is a good opportunity. At least we can hear what the federal forces have charged us with. An NTR soldier looked at the communication station Su Lu was hugging and stared at the 2 bullet holes in the exposed metal wreckage. He said in shock, "This thing can be repaired?" Back in the day, when our Group 7 went to the front lines, we were always the team that expended the least resources. Why? Because what our boss is best at is collecting and repairing junk. Mountain Pow sat beside him with a cigarette in his mouth and said mockingly, "What's the big deal about a communication station? Just now, if you wanted to pick up 2 broken mechas in a valley, the boss could have gotten you a good mecha. Even if it couldn't fight, it could at least run." Is that a compliment or a mockery? Su Li used his fingers to deftly connect the 2 wires and said, "But if there's a chance along the way, you guys can keep an eye out for broken mechas." Through this broken communication station, the people in the cave finally heard the voice of the federal military's upper echelons for the first time since the silence of yesterday's communication. Then silence. In the secret message sent by the Federation base to the various troops at the front lines, their NTR unit was confirmed to have colluded with the Empire and betrayed the Federation. The request was for all divisions to eliminate them as soon as they discover their tracks. Xiong Linquan slapped the wet wall of the cave and said angrily, "They actually accused us of betrayal. Those people are so shameless." After a moment of silence, Dongfang Yu suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "This is really too damn interesting. The base isn't wrong. Accusing us of betrayal is also reasonable." He pointed at Su Lu and said, "Isn't this just an Empire person? It's just that you guys haven't had the time to collude with him and betray the Federation yet." Dongfang Yu's tone was very absurd, but it was hard to tell whether it was sarcasm or the crazy words of someone who had suffered a mental blow. None of the team members were in the mood to argue with him. Leaning towards the 11th Division was the most conservative and also the most reasonable choice. Now that this path was cut off, the orders from the base had brought them into an even more fatal situation. Right now, no one knew where to go. The despair at the end of the road was just like the strange fog that filled the air of the Southwest War Zone, blocking off all paths ahead. Suddenly, the fog at the northern foot of Mount Pingliang dispersed. Even the thick clouds in the sky seemed to magically open up a gap, letting in clear sunlight. A hail of bullets came from mountainside. Enemy attack. Chapter 902. The sound of the heavy autocannon bullets striking the rocks was not the crisp sound of raindrops. Instead, it was more like the muffled sound of water droplets falling into a pile of hot ash. Following these sounds, the heat was rapidly absorbed, and then the water vaporized. Life drained away, just like the rocks that were constantly falling from the cave entrance. The heavy firepower on the mountainside was less than 600 meters away from the cave entrance. The dense rain of shrapnel terrifyingly sealed off the people's path forward. Amidst the smoke and the muffled sounds of death, the members in the cave were unable to effectively observe the enemy. Being directly turned into a land of death by the enemy and dying such a miserable and humiliating death was not a mistake the battle-hardened Group 7 would make. Unit NTR, which took on the most dangerous mission of the Federation's elite divisions, would also not make such a mistake. Since they had chosen the cave as their base, they had naturally made the relevant preparations. Xiong Linquan and the other members hid behind the rocks, put on their bulletproof helmets, and waited silently and patiently amidst the rain of smoke and shrapnel. After a few seconds, a voice rang out from the battlefield infantry command system. 612 meters, 22. 56 meters. Sync 21. 3 degrees. Heavy firepower. Reorganize camp. Close in. Inorganic armor. A moment later, that voice rang out again. People of the Empire. At this moment, Monkey was on a broadleaf tree outside the cave. As a sentry, he was in charge of monitoring the movements of this mountain forest, helping his comrades in the cave predict danger in advance. In the end, he did not discover that the enemy had silently crept over through the thick fog. This made his mood somewhat terrible, and his voice was somewhat trembling. Fortunately, he was still calm and clear. With a few simple keywords, he very well summed up the current situation. As for the last person from the Empire, he said it in an especially awkward manner. In the many years of battle before, he had never made such a report because the enemy was definitely from the Empire. However, this enemy that was fighting alone right now was very likely to be from the Federation. After clearly hearing the location of the fatal heavy firepower at the mountainside, the mountain cannon quickly pulled over his military backpack and picked up the infantry narrow-barreled cannon as fast as he could. Without even aiming, he directly fired at the collapsed rocks and dust at the entrance of the cave. Under the suppression of the Empire's heavy cannons, he had no way of peeking out of the hole to launch an accurate bombardment. The precise location given by the monkey was meaningless under such circumstances. Thin and long Lotus-style rapid explosive bullets shot out of the single soldier cannon on his shoulder at high speed, dragging a blazing white tail that was about half a meter long. They instantly penetrated the cave and shot toward the forest. They seemed to have no target, but they could tilt upward at any moment and soar into the sky, disappearing in vain. However, almost at the same time the mountain cannon completed this aimless bombardment, Monkey, who was hiding in the broadleaf trees, quickly pressed a button on the side of the soldier's helmet. Through the matrix optical aiming system on the transparent light screen, he stared fixedly at the Empire's heavy machine cannon that was continuously wreaking havoc 600 meters away. The slender and long Lotus bomb received the data signal from the forest, and its tail emitted a faint beep. The wings that were about the size of a palm trembled at a high speed and instantly locked onto the target. Dragging a terrifying flame tail, it directly blasted toward a certain spot on the mountainside. With a muffled boom, a violent explosion occurred on the mountainside. The heavy machine cannon immediately misfired, and more than 10 Empire soldiers scattered on the ground, unknown whether they were dead or alive. Xiong Linquan was the first to jump up. He rushed out of the cave entrance and hid behind a hard rock. He picked up the heavy rapid-fire rifle and pulled the trigger at those figures in the forest. The rest of the team members also quickly pounced out, each of them spreading out to choose their shooting positions and began to counterattack. Su Lu and Paul carried Dongfang Yu on a stretcher and quickly followed behind, while that Empire captive followed behind in a sorry state. Everyone's timing was very precise, and their coordination was also very practiced. Whether it was Pearl and the other members of Group 7 or the NTR soldiers, in this seemingly simple process of coming out of the cave to counterattack, they all displayed extremely outstanding military qualities. The Empire troops at the foot of the mountain had already closed in enough distance and began to suppress with even more ferocious firepower. Dozens of gun barrels spewed out bullet fire, and the flying rain of bullets cut the forest leaves into countless desolate fragments. Monkey slipped down the broadleaf tree like a nimble shadow. Just as his feet touched the ground, the broadleaf tree behind him was directly cut in two by a burst of violent fire. He couldn't care less about the lingering fear and loudly warned the team members scattered around the forest. There are armored vehicles entering the valley. Be careful of their heavy artillery. Xiong Linquan raised his gun and shot down the nearest Empire soldiers at the foot of the cliff. He ordered through the communication system, "Open the triangular fan to the southwest." Be careful to keep your distance. The team members fought and retreated according to the deployment, but they were still unable to get rid of the Empire troops at the foot of the mountain. Occasionally, there would be muffled groans, and the situation was extremely passive. Xiong Linquan quickly calculated the enemy's military deployment, but he kept feeling that something was wrong. The firepower at the foot of the mountain was too fierce. His brows were tightly knitted, and he warned everyone through the system, the enemy is not a normal battalion. They have the qualifications to call for air support. Monkey, pay attention to the movements in the air. If you miss one more goddamn thing, I'll kill you. Traversing through the southwest theater of war, where fierce battles were taking place, the lone army had long been mentally prepared. Although the weird, thick fog and the high-intensity electronic shield could help them cover their tracks, it also meant that they could encounter the enemy at any time, anywhere, without any mental preparation. However, they didn't think that their luck would be so bad. The first battle they fought on the road of escape was already facing such powerful Empire troops. The appearance of the Empire troops at the northern shore of Liangshan wasn't actually a surprise. Right now, the troops attacking the lone army were the vanguard battalion of a certain Empire elite brigade. This elite brigade was ordered by His Highness to reinforce the southwest war zone with the intention of forcefully attacking the Federation's 2nd Military Region's 11th Armored Division. However, for nearly a month, they could only watch the 11th Armored Division shadow from afar, unable to approach. They could only watch as the 11th Armored Division moved unhindered above the Empire's broken defensive line, unable to rush over to provide support. There were even 2 occasions when they were almost ambushed and defeated by the enemy. The Federation's 11th Division was Du Shaoqing's direct line of troops. They inherited the fighting style of that famous Federation general, cold, precise, and unconventional. Like a storm, they fought and lured, directly dragging this Empire's entire brigade to the point where it was about to be crippled. Right now, this Empire's entire brigade was on the brink of insanity and collapse. Today, their vanguard battalion had finally found the traces left behind by the 11th Division with great difficulty. They resolutely killed their way into the mountain, disregarding the fact that their forces were small and weak and wanted to fight to the death with the enemy. Who would have thought that the enemy would once again furiously slip away? Under these circumstances, they discovered the Federation's NTR squad in a mountain cave. One could imagine how many bullets the vanguard battalion would use to vent the anger in their hearts. Under a hidden mountain rock somewhere in the southwest Liangshan Mountains, Sulun narrowed his eyes and looked at the lead gray clouds, as well as the rare blue sky in the distance, silently calculating when the Empire's air support would arrive. The modified rifle in his hand did not make a single sound during the battle. He only covered Dongfeng Yu on the stretcher, as well as Paul and another Empire soldier who were carrying the stretcher. He chose the most reasonable path and quickly retreated with the team, so he did not attract the attention of the Empire's troops. Instead, it was relatively safe. Rapid gunshots rang out from time to time in the dense mountain forest. The leaves covered with countless layers of fine dust trembled with the whistling of bullets. The screams of injuries and the sound of heavy objects falling to the ground were particularly clear and ear-piercing. Paul, who was half squatting on one end of the stretcher, stared at the battle scene in the forest. He listened to the cries of his comrades before they died and listened to the familiar hometown language. A fierce struggle appeared on Akiji's face. His eyes grew redder and redder, and he could not help but glance at Sulu. He thought that there was only one Federation officer on the stretcher here, and he was seriously injured. As long as he subdued him, everything would be solved. During the battle, Sulu did not look at him. However, at this time, he seemed to feel Paul's burning gaze and directly shook his head. Paul was startled and struggled for a long time. In the end, he gave up his idea. He gritted his teeth in disappointment and squatted back. The other Empire captive in charge of carrying the stretcher was already middle-aged, and his gray-brown hair was a little dirty. He felt the arrival of an opportunity like Paul and could not help but nervously lick his lips. Then, he quietly reached out to the stretcher. After taking care of the heavily injured federal officer for 2 months, the Imperial captive had long discovered that the federal officer hid a pistol in the gap between the stretcher. He believed that as long as he could get his hands on that pistol, he would definitely be able to control the situation. Then, he wanted to order the strange, small-eyed man to surrender so that everyone could return to the Empire Army and even make a great military contribution. Then, in the future, his descendants would no longer have to serve those damn aristocrats. Just when his hand was more than 10 centimeters away from the stretcher, Sulu, who had been holding a rock to observe the situation on the battlefield, suddenly turned around, raised the rifle in his hand, and pointed it at the center of his eyebrows silently. The Empire captive looked at the black barrel in despair. He grimaced as if he was crying and laughing. He slowly retracted his hand, sat back on the ground, and whispered a few words in a low voice. Dong Fengyu, who had been looking drowsy on the stretcher, suddenly opened his eyes at this time. His right hand slowly reached out with the anti-water cloth and held the pistol. He quietly looked at the rifle in Su Li's hand, the emotions in his eyes somewhat complicated. Suddenly, he asked in a hoarse and weak voice, "Why don't you just tell the Empire Army that you are a member of the Empire's royal family? Who the fuck dares to shoot at you?" Sula laughed at himself and said, "No one will believe me. Even if I have identity verification, who cares about this when I am in frenzy? It is very difficult for me to make the Empire believe that I am from the Empire on the battlefield, just like I can't make the Federation believe that I am from the Federation. That's why you don't fire a shot in the battle." Dong Fengyu looked at his face and said in a hoarse voice, "And then you will stop your fellow countrymen from stealing my gun." Chapter 903. Hearing this, Sulu did not say anything. He turned back to look at the intense battle in the forest and carefully listened to the feedback from the infantry command system. Then, he frowned slightly and looked up at the sky, feeling the fog droplets condensing again. The leaden clouds above the foothills of Pingliang Mountain were still hanging low, and the blue crack in the distance was slowly closing. With the help of the beautiful afterglow, he could vaguely see a few small black dots. Because the distance was too far, even with his astonishingly sharp eyes, he still could not see what those black dots were. But he could guess. Behind the rocks, there was a rustling sound as Monkey rushed down, crushing the weeds along the way. He crouched beside him and panted heavily. "Boss, monitor the strange fluctuations in the atmosphere. It's possible that the Empire has sent fighter jets over." Sulu narrowed his eyes at the small black dots flying close to the clouds in the distance. His hands forcefully unwrapped the oilcloth wrapped around the rifle, and at the same time completed the action of loading. He said, "I've seen them. Everyone must hurry up and retreat." In order to retreat before the Empire's fighter jets arrived, they first had to suppress the Empire's troops. However, it was difficult to complete such a difficult task with only a dozen guns. Sulu did not say anything. His left foot lightly stepped on the rock, and his entire body turned into an afterimage as he rushed into the forest. He did not run toward the place where the firepower was the densest, but deliberately chose to distance himself from the battlefield. Relying on his terrifying speed, he quietly arrived at a mountain stream a kilometer away. Without any cover, he simply stood beside the splashing white rocks. His hands held the modified gun straight, and he aimed at the vague figures in the forest in the distance and quickly pulled the trigger. He had not fired a single shot in the battle so far, but when it was necessary to fire, he would definitely not hesitate. With the crisp sound of a gunshot, an Empire's heavy metal gun that was wildly firing in the forest to suppress Xiong Linquan and the others from retreating suddenly stopped firing. The water from the mountain stream continued to fall, splashing against the smooth rocks. Su Li's rifle fired at a clear and steady rhythm. From time to time, there would be Imperial soldiers holding their thighs and falling down, or screaming in pain as they retreated. Even the best snipers in the Federation and the Empire wouldn't be able to do such a thing. What was even more terrifying was that he could even choose where the bullets would hit the target while he was shooting, avoiding the vital points as much as possible. This kind of shooting method had long surpassed the imagination of all military personnel. Even Su Lu himself would not have been able to do this on the battlefield, unless he had used a CW back then. He and Philip had designed and built this modified gun together. Apart from the fact that the ammunition was relatively light, the most terrifying feature of the gun was its accuracy. However, to be able to perfectly display the accuracy of this rifle from such a long distance required the shooter to have unimaginable stability and strength. In this world, apart from Su Lu, only Huai Chaoshi and Li Feng could do it. The sound of the stream slapping the white rocks covered the muffled sound of the shooting, which would make it take more time for the Empire to determine his position. He just stood by the stream and kept pulling the trigger, covering the retreat of the team. Thick fog gradually rose, lead clouds thickened, and the crisp and dry gunshots kept ringing in the distance. Taking advantage of this rare and precious opportunity, Xiong Linquan ordered all the team members to quickly gather and then retreat to the southwest of Pingliang Mountain. My brother hasn't come back yet. He's trying to save you. How can you leave him behind? Paul stared angrily into Xiong Linquan's eyes and shouted in choppy Federation language. At this dangerous moment, Xiong Linquan did not have time to talk nonsense with him. He signaled with his eyes for Mountain Pao to carry the stretcher. He grabbed Paul's belt with his right hand and quickly ran to the back of the forest with him. He said in a deep voice, "You don't know your brother. He is the most powerful warrior. He is safer when he is alone, and he knows how to find us." Group 7 often repeated this process, whether it was on the dangerous battlefield or in the Federation city. They had their own secret trace system. So when Su Lu jumped down the cliff like a ghost half an hour later and returned to the team, few people were surprised except for Paul. Mountain Pao stuffed the blood-stained pocket watch into his arms and walked to his side with a forced smile. "Boss, how was the result? How many did you snipe this time?" Su Lu smiled and shook his head, not answering. Mountain Pao was stunned and then slapped his head heavily. He remembered that the boss was from the Empire. He must be in a very heavy mood to shoot his compatriots at this time. He had really asked a very bad question. In addition to regret, Mountain Pao also felt some regret that he could no longer find the feeling of the past. Every time they returned from shooting, the new members of Group 7 always liked to surround Su Lu and help him count how many bullets he had fired today, so how many enemies had fallen. At that time, calculating the boss's record was so simple. The fog shrouded the mountains again. This lone army walked silently in the difficult Pingliang mountain range. Perhaps it was because of exhaustion, but no one spoke again. In the previous battle, especially in the last round of heavy artillery attack by the Empire's Vanguard Battalion, 2 members had died, as well as the Empire's captive. No one in the team expressed condolences or sadness for their companions who had left. Not because they did not care about life and death, but because they had seen too much in the war. They were not indifferent and numb, but numb to life and death. Su Lu understood how sad it was to be indifferent to life and death, so he was more and more certain that everyone should live and not die, at least not for any reason other than time. Looking back at the fog in the distance, he narrowed his eyes, thinking that he really should have let that Empire man leave at that time. The setting sun unwillingly penetrated the dark gray clouds, sprinkling a few pitiful rays of twilight on Pingliang Mountain. He retracted his gaze and quickened his pace to catch up with the team. After climbing through Pingliang Mountain and returning to the southern foot of the mountain, the team members were somewhat hesitant when deciding the next direction of the team, but they all agreed that they should leave immediately. They couldn't get close to the 11th Division, and this fog was too strange. No one knew when it would suddenly disappear like before. It was too dangerous to continue moving in and out of the southwest war zone like this. This small army couldn't afford to lose any more men in battle. "Go to Camp 1. Old Gu is still there. It's too dangerous on the way." Su Lu narrowed his eyes at the steep snowy peak in front of him. He thought about how he still could not contact the spaceship and said softly, "We'll climb directly." Chapter 904. Why fight? Because the enemy is there. This was the famous saying of Group 7 that had shocked the Federation. However, Lan Xiaolong, who had said this at the Nebula Award, was now famous and no longer at the front lines. Why climb a mountain? Because the mountain is there. This was the famous saying that many adventurers worshipped as their creed. However, when Xiong Linquan and the others looked at the unreachable mountain peak in the dusk and the dangerous wall that was cut in half by the leaden clouds and compared it to Su Li's words of directly climbing it, they could not feel any passion in their hearts. Monkey took out the tactical manual and reported the height of this mountain peak to everyone. He then shrugged and said, "The top half of this mountain peak is completely above the turbulent cloud layer. The military satellites in the sky can see the ground very clearly. If we want to secretly climb it, we can only do it at night, and it's still very risky." The height of the height of the height was shocking, and climbing in the dark was even more dangerous. The team members looked at Su Lo. Although they did not directly object, the hesitation in their eyes showed their attitude. "We want to climb this mountain peak, but of course it's not because it's there that I don't like the look of it and have to step on it a few times." Feeling the tension and suspicion in the team, Su Lo made a joke that was not very funny. He pointed at the snowy mountain and said, "It's because other than directly climbing, we can't find any other way. The further away from natural danger, the more likely it is to encounter danger from the same kind. Boss, we haven't seen each other for 3 years. How did you become a third-rate philosopher?" Xiong Linquan said with a frown. He then took out a precise map from his backpack and began to try to find a relatively safe climbing route. Mocking was one thing, carrying out orders was another. This dangerous mountain peak that stood at the edge of the mining area in the southwest of a Mohua planet had no name. There was not much green vegetation on the mountain peak that was about 6,000 meters above sea level, only grayish-black volcanic rocks. There were no minerals. The empire that was busy mining graphite on this planet had not really paid any attention to it for thousands of years. The team's final destination was a pass on the left side of the nameless mountain peak. The exact height was 5,477 meters, and this route was relatively safe and easy to walk. The weather in the mountains was a bit abnormal. The lone army walked along the rugged mountain road with difficulty, passing through the silent forest on the mountainside, and finally walked out of the strange, thick fog area. Suddenly, they came to who knows how many meters thick lead clouds. The battle-hardened team members still couldn't understand why this desperate battle would push the clouds to such a low altitude. If Su Lu was given some time, he could probably use some vague calculations to form a formula between the amount of ammunition, electromagnetic turbulence, and this strange astronomical phenomenon. However, at this time, he was holding the stretcher tightly with both hands and staring at the steep mountain road under his feet. Beads of sweat dripped down, and he had no energy to do such boring work. If they had rested for a long time and had just entered the battlefield, it wouldn't have been difficult for Old Seven's team to climb this mountain in one night. However, this team had been on the run for many days in the Southwest War Zone and was already exhausted. The equipment of the lightly wounded was all taken over by the other team members. Paul and Bede, who were responsible for carrying the stretcher, were already exhausted and were replaced by Su Lu and Xiong Linquan. As the two most physically strong people in the team, they also carried 5 or 6 heavy guns on their shoulders. They looked like 2 greedy hedgehogs preparing for winter with too many fruits on their bodies. The team members walked in silence within a distance of less than 20 meters. No one spoke, no one talked, and no one laughed, conserving all of their physical strength. No one flattered or tried to take the guns on Su Lu and Xiong Linquan's shoulders, because this was a battle. Everyone needed to do something to maintain efficiency. The mountain road gradually became steeper and steeper, and it couldn't even be called a road at all. The team just picked the gaps between the gray-black volcanic rocks to move forward. The temperature in the surrounding environment was getting lower and lower, and the increasingly heavy breathing formed a thick white fog in front of the team members' lips. After passing through about 7 kilometers of volcanic debris scattered area, The team stopped to replenish some nutrition and water, and at the same time to recover their physical strength. Su Lu took 2 sips of water and then handed it back to Xiong Linquan beside him. Through the close-range, pathfinding light above his head, he looked at the thinner and thinner fog and asked, "How long until we get out of the clouds?" "Soon." Xiong Linquan wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and took out a heated military blanket from his backpack to cover the stretcher behind him. He said, "The problem is that according to the height table on the map, the road above is much steeper than it is now. It is very likely that there will be snow at the top. Now we can still carry the stretcher, but we definitely can't do it later." "Carry it." Sulu licked his dry lips and said without hesitation, "We too will change, and then you pay more attention to the warmth of the team members, especially the wounded. There must be no problems." Xiong Linquan nodded and did not raise any doubts. Although carrying a seriously wounded person on his back and climbing the dangerous mountain peak would certainly bear a certain degree of risk, he was very used to doing things according to the orders of the boss, and he was proud of this trust. On the stretcher behind the two of them, Dongfang Yu struggled to raise his right arm and tugged at the military blanket that was gradually heating up. Listening to the conversation, he seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. All he did was to seriously chew on the nutrition cream paste. After leaving the grayish-black volcanic rock area, they could no longer find a ready-made passage. Monkey, who was good at climbing, explored the steep cliffs, using the fluorescent stick tied to his hip to mark the direction. The rest of the team members carefully followed behind him, always paying attention to not step on empty air and fall into the endless dark night beside the cliff. The stretcher with all the hydraulic equipment removed was left at the bottom of the cliff. Su Lu moved the heavy guns in front of him and tied Dongfang Yu behind him with a military belt. He followed behind Paul, always paying attention to his movements to avoid any accidents. Xiong Linquan followed at the back of the team and said, "We'll change after another 100 meters." Su Lu put his right hand deep into the cliff crack and climbed up with a muffled groan. He did not say anything. Similar to the calculation results, after climbing the steep cliff for a short time, the team passed through the lead gray cloud area and came to the clear night sky. Although it did not take long, this part of the road was extremely dangerous. The big moon, as white as a breast, was still on the other side of the skyline at this moment. Most of its beauty was covered by clouds, but it was still bright above the cliff because there was still a sky full of stars. The tired team members suddenly saw the cliff in front of them become bright white. They subconsciously looked up and saw countless shining stars in the blue and black night sky. They gently blinked and sent the silver light to the cliffs, plastering the bodies of the tired travelers on the cliff. The scenery was very beautiful, and the starlight was very quiet. The fatigue and injuries in the team members' bodies, and the numbing smoke brought by countless battles, seemed to be washed away in an instant. They were very willing to watch the starlight fall asleep like this. They were no longer willing to lift their lead-like legs and climb toward the more dangerous pass to return to the thick lead-colored clouds again. Sulu looked at the stars in the sky and narrowed his eyes. He patted Paul's thin shoulder in front of him, indicating that he should continue to move forward. Then he ordered in a low voice, "Continue." The cliff here gradually slowed down. The team member's physical strength was on the verge of collapse, but he could not allow the team to stop and rest because the altitude here was high and the temperature was too low. Once they stopped, it would be easy to have problems. What was more dangerous was that when the starlight illuminated their path, it would be easier for the military satellites outside the atmosphere to find them. "Let's change." Xiong Linquan climbed over, gasping for breath, grabbed Su Li's military boots, and said, "You ate too much of the quota. You have to give me some." Sulu looked back at him and smiled. His neat teeth looked particularly white under the starlight. He said, "When I'm gasping for breath like you can change." Dongfang Yu, who was tied to his back, was the most relaxed person in this climb, but the low temperature and turbulence between the peaks still made him extremely uncomfortable. However, he did not want to affect the progress of the team, so he remained silent all the way. Even when the severe tearing pain came from the wound in his abdomen, he just frowned a little more and licked the blood between his gums faster. He refused to let out a groan. However, at this time, when he heard Su Li's words, he finally could not help but speak. He used the only hand that could move to tighten the blanket on his body and said mockingly, "He likes to show off. Big Bear, let him continue." Su Lu ignored him and followed Paul's footsteps and began to walk again with difficulty. The heavy guns on his chest were like pendulums under an old clock, rippling back and forth, appearing to be particularly rhythmic. After several hours of difficult climbing, this lonely team, which was regarded as an enemy by all humans, finally succeeded in climbing the rarely visited Nameless Peak Pass. The pass was more than 5,000 meters above sea level, and the oxygen density was extremely low, but it still ushered in a burst of soft cheers that could not be suppressed. The extremely tired team members, with wild smiles on their faces, struggled to walk to the bottom of the suspended cliff. They did not care about the ice and snow between the gravel, and just laid down on their backs. With the cover of the cliff, there should be no need to worry about being discovered by military satellites in the sky, so Xiong Linquan did not stop the team members from collapsing like a carnival. He took a deep breath, drove away the tiredness in his chest and abdomen, and began to distribute medicine to the team members. Su Lu piled Dongfang Yu and the heavy guns in the corner under the cliff, and took the energy bar handed over by Xiong Linquan. From the label, he found that it was actually the provisions of the Imperial Army. Only then did he remember that they had been on the run for 2 months in the Southwest Theater of Operations, and the original provisions must have been long gone. After chewing 2 mouthfuls of the energy bar, he walked to Paul and whispered a few words, then picked up his military backpack and walked out of the suspended cliff. Xiong Linquan, who was changing the medical tape on Monkey's back, looked at his back in confusion. He did not understand what he was going to do. At this time, staying under the bright starlight for 1 more second may bring more danger to this team. Chapter 905. Just like this tired, lone army, the bright moon of planet Emo, Hua finally broke through the blockade of the thick clouds after a difficult climb. It leaped into the deep blue night sky, immediately suppressing the surrounding starlight. The bright but still cold moonlight slanted down from outside the atmosphere, illuminating the mountain pass piled with snow and rubble. Even further away from the cliff, one could faintly see the moonlight mixed with countless clouds dancing together, turning into an indescribable, illusory scene. Not many people could personally witness this rare scene of the moon moving clouds at night, but Su Lu did not walk out of the hanging cliff to enjoy the scenery. He walked through the shadows to the cliff edge and stopped. Standing in the darkness, he threw his military backpack into the moonlight. His slender and steady fingers quickly adjusted the equipment, and he listened carefully to the background noise of the electric noise in his ears. He changed the direction of the fan in the air with a fixed rhythm. Finally, he heard the sound that he hated most of the time, but now it sounded exceptionally pleasant. I am here, 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 I am here. Listening to Philip's nonstop repetition in his ears, Su Lu could not help but frown. He scolded in a low voice. "Are you a repeater, or are you reciting poetry again? In order to let you find me when you want to find me, I have to keep repeating this sentence like an idiot. It's already very hard. As for reciting poetry, if it was reciting poetry, I would definitely say, 'I am not here, I am somewhere else.'" Su Lu was stunned for a moment before he mocked. "Just now, I was mocked for being a third-rate philosopher. Now I understand that it was all because of you, a fourth-rate philosopher. Please, you want a mechanical brain to master philosophy, this boring human magic game? Cut the crap." Su Lu lowered his head and began to pack his military backpack. "Hurry up and send a spaceship to pick us up. There are 14 people in total. You can calculate the location yourself." In his opinion, since the two sides were in contact, it was very easy for Philip to bring this lone army to a safe area with his ability. That was why he was in the mood. Looking at the cold moonlight outside the cliff, he stood in the shadows of the cliff and joked with Philip, who he had not seen in a long time. However, Philip's reply immediately extinguished all of his hopes. Outside the atmosphere of the Mo planet, the strange-looking black spaceship was currently moving at an extremely high speed. Thousands of kilometers away, two three-winged spaceships were trying to find something. In the central control room, deep within the black spaceship, a slender alloy probe vibrated angrily at a high speed. Philip used a precise ground communication device and screamed towards a nameless peak in the southwest darkness. That meteorite belt is not my home in Bermuda. How can I hide there forever? In order to find you, an unorganized, undisciplined, and good-natured person, how could they not be discovered by those lousy ships? Yes, they're lousy ships. I'm a good ship, but I can't compete with others who have too many ships. Both fleets have discovered me, especially the fleet from the Federation. They're looking for me like crazy. What else can I do other than hide like a thief? Zhong Huiyin, who is sitting cross-legged in a round chair, was eating ice cream in boredom. She glanced at the picture of the rear area on the light beam now and then to make sure that the two three-winged warships of the Federation Charter that were like flies hadn't noticed the burn marks that she had left behind. The beautiful girl had no interest in participating in this kind of scene that had happened frequently in the past 3 years. Although she was worried about Su Li's safety, she knew that Philip was telling the truth. In the past few hours, the Federation fleet had suddenly increased the patrols on the Dark Hemisphere. This seemingly omnipotent spaceship was almost surrounded by several giant ships several times. No one knew what Su Lu said in the communication system, but the slender alloy sensor trembled more and more violently. Like a child whose pure feelings were hurt, she said angrily, "I'm sorry. Of course, I have the ability to parachute onto the Mo planet. Don't you know what I'm capable of? I only need to destroy 4 Federation warships, and I can easily take your lousy troops away." Philip's voice suddenly became solemn and dignified at this moment. According to my calculations, at least 23,556 Federation soldiers have died. Are you sure? There was a moment of silence in the control room. After hearing Su Li's answer, Philip said proudly, "I knew that a wavering pseudo-pacifist like you wouldn't have the ability or the determination to make such a decision. If you were Du Shaoqing, would I still hesitate?" Then his voice became serious again. "Give me some time. I've been trying to hack into the Federation's air and ground command network, but the cold, broken computer under the Federation's underground is obviously well prepared, and the progress is very slow. Let me tell you a piece of bad news. That guy has improved a lot." Xiong Linquan looked at Su Lu, who was walking down the cliff, and noticed that his expression was a little strange. He frowned and asked, "What's wrong? I heard you talking to someone just now." "I have a spaceship up there. Don't worry, there's no problem." Su Lu didn't put down the heavy marching backpack in his hand and directly said to everyone under the cliff, "Withdraw quickly after you've rested. We have to enter the clouds before dawn." No one hesitated. They pulled out the oxygen tubes in their noses, stood up, and began to organize their equipment. Paul, who had been squatting alone in the corner, silently took off the military blanket in his hand and returned it to Mountain Pow. Then, like before, he took the marching backpack from Su Li's hand. When Su Lu hung the heavy firearms around his neck and turned around to tie up Dongfang Yu, he found that Xiong Linquan had already tied Dongfang Yu onto his back and had already walked more than 10 meters away. He could vaguely hear Dongfang Yu mumbling on his broad back, "I'm a piece of trash, but now I become a treasure that's being robbed." Su Lu smiled, snatched the heavy supply box from Monkey's hands, and strode forward. Nameless Peak still belonged to the Pingliang mountain range. After they crossed the pass, it was equivalent to crossing the entire mountain range and coming to the south. The terrain on this side of the peak was obviously much flatter. Although the distance between the 2 points was relatively far, at least it wasn't as difficult and dangerous as before. It didn't take too long for the team to re-enter the thick lead clouds for more than 5,000 meters above sea level. The clear light in the night sky was once again swallowed by the clouds, and the surroundings were dark. Only the close-range searchlight on the helmet and the fluorescent stick hanging from Monkeys, but the forefront illuminated the path beneath their feet. in a sparse mountain willow forest, the team decided to temporarily rest for a while. Xiong Linquan stood in front of the rock slope, pointed in front, and said, "Continue to walk for 30 kilometers in this direction, and you will see a large lake. Go around that lake, and you will reach Autumn Leaf Plains. Then pass through a gentle mountain, and you will reach the camp. If nothing happened to old Gu, he should be waiting for us in that camp now." Su Lu, who was standing beside him, narrowed his eyes and looked into the endless night. The base doesn't know the exact location of the camp. This is a habit of NTR. The location of the camp is strictly kept a secret. It was chosen at the last minute during the mission. Even the division headquarters doesn't know where the camp is. Sulu nodded and narrowed his eyes. The fog around the rock peaks was actually the lead clouds that could be seen when looking up from the ground. It blocked out all the light in all directions, so they couldn't see the lake and autumn leaf plains that Xiong Linquan had mentioned. Xiong Linquan brought up the electronic map, tapped his finger lightly, and said, "We will turn at the edge of autumn leaf plains. According to the orders of the General Staff, all federal forces are strictly prohibited from entering the eastern region of autumn leaf plains." Why? I heard that the Academy of Sciences expert support team discovered that the graphite mine east of autumn leaf plains has mutated. The radiation is especially severe, and the human body can't withstand this kind of radiation at all. The detour will be longer, and the chances of encountering enemies will be higher. Sula looked at the clear red line on the electronic map and frowned. Is the General Staff's statement reliable? Will there be any problems? The underground resistance has been sending in intelligence. There is a rich graphite mine below the plateau, but the Empire has never mined it. This can be used as proof. Su Lu agreed with this judgment after a moment of silence. He and Xiong Linquan didn't notice that Dong Fangyu, who was sitting behind them, frowned after hearing this. "I'm still worried about the sky. We walked for too long outside the clouds just now. Will the base discover us?" Xiong Linquan put away the electronic map, looked at Su Lu, and said worriedly, "The sensitivity of military satellites isn't high, but the Bureau of Proclamation must have scattered countless signal relay stations in the sky above the southwest war zone. Those things are very good at capturing the pulse of the identity chip." Speaking of this, he subconsciously touched the back of his neck and laughed self-deprecatingly. "I've lived for almost 40 years, and there are only a few times when I remember that I have a chip buried in my neck. Only now do I realize that this thing is really deadly. Boss, is the chip behind your neck still there? Does the Empire have a way to take it out?" If the Empire had such advanced technology, this war wouldn't have started at all. Su Lu replied with a smile. He didn't discuss this further. He patted Xiong Linquan's shoulder and said, "Don't worry about the glory of the charter. Just keep walking. It'll be fine as long as we don't run into the enemy." From the beginning of their escape until now, no one in the team had noticed that there was a small device in Su Li's jacket pocket that kept emitting a faint blue light, an invisible blue light. Going all the way down from the nameless mountain pass, the exhausted team had just left the lead clouds and entered the thick fog. This strange fog cast a layer of ominous foreboding in the team's hearts. According to the Federal Forces military manual, Imo Hua Planet, especially the southwest mining zone, had never had such a large and continuous foggy weather in this season. Just as the atmosphere of the team was oppressed to the extreme by the thick fog, the surrounding environment suddenly changed rapidly. The fog was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. To be more precise, it was being absorbed by some strange force, and then evaporated without a trace. The sky at the end of the rugged mountain path suddenly brightened, and a tranquil lake appeared before everyone's eyes. However, the disappearing fog was not a gift from the sky, but the influence of the human war. The team members on the mountain path saw the densely packed mecha and armored vehicles by the lake, saw the bullet lines dancing in the sky, and felt the blazing artillery fire that was enough to evaporate the fog. They were so shocked that they couldn't say anything. They were witnessing the decisive final battle between the Federation and the Empire in the Southwest War Zone. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.